Barry. I'm a product engineer at Esri on the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World team. And so I'm a cartographer, product engineer, do a little bit of everything. Jason?
My name is Jason Camerano. I'm a product engineer on the Parcels team and on the Tasks team. So perfect fit for today's presentation. Amy?
And I'm Amy Andis. I'm a product engineer on the Parcel team.
All right, and I believe Jason has a poll for us to start with.
Yeah, sure. So let's go ahead and start off with the first one, and let me launch it. Let me know if everyone can see it.
Yes.
Those are the kickoff questions that are in progress right now. So we have 3 questions here. It looks like they'll launch them all at once. Do you like working from home? This is always kind of a polarizing question. How familiar are you with Arcade? A lot of today's sessions are going to be focusing around Arcade, the first half of it mainly. So we're just kind of curious where your experience level is with Arcade. And then how do you define your ArcGIS Pro proficiency level? Because we know that there's still a lot of people are using Pro, but their proficiency might not be where, that might be more beginner, intermediate. So we just kind of want to know where everyone is today. And I like to see that the never used it has not gotten any votes yet. So everyone's.
I was going to say that too. It's like, oh, we at least don't have to introduce what it is.
Exactly. Oh, man.
I'm sure that if the first question is, do you like working from home and have kids?
Yes, that's true. It's a little caveat on that one too.
Strong or independent.
All right, so let's pretty much go over the results. So do you like working from home? Yes is pretty much 47%, and then somewhat 35%. That's probably where I fit in on that one. How familiar are you with Arcade? It looks like, well, this one's never heard of it until now, is about 38%. So welcome everybody. You're going to learn a lot. A good crash course in Arcade. Going to get a lot of good resources too. And use it a few times and want to learn more, 62%. So it's perfect presentation for everyone here. How do you define your ArcGIS Pro proficiency level? Intermediate, 56%. And then we've got a couple advanced users here, and then a lot of beginners as well. So great turnout today. I will end this polling. Oh, I can share it. I thought everyone might be seeing those results too. Well, there we go. If anyone wants to take a screenshot, there you are. All right, I'm gonna stop this and hand it back to you, Lisa.
Sounds good. All right, so I just have to figure out how to share my screen. This is always the fun part. Let me know as soon as you can see my screen to make sure that awesome.
The agenda.
Yeah, so today we're going to be showing you quite a few things when it comes to Arcade and how to use it within ArcGIS. So I'll be giving an introduction to what it is, kind of why you would use it, just some basic demos. My demos will actually be in ArcGIS Online. And then we'll be moving into Pro so that you can see it in the environment most of you guys will be working in. And Amir will be doing that one. He'll also then be showing us attribute rules, as well as attribute rules for parcels. That will be by Amy. We'll have some questions and a break because, goodness knows we can't all sit for 3 hours. I mean, maybe. And then we're going to end with tasks. That'll be Jason and Amir. And then again, we'll have some questions. So we're really excited for all the content we have to show for you today. And I'm just going to go ahead and kick it off with the introduction to Arcade within ArcGIS Online and how you can use it to enhance your maps in general. But like I said, I'll just mention, I'll be showing it in ArcGIS Live. So what is Arcade? It's not named after the video game. It's more like an arch, as you can see in the picture here. And it's actually a lightweight expression language that's built on top of ArcGIS. It's actually built based with the same notation as JavaScript. And so if any of you are familiar with JavaScript at all, it will actually look quite similar. It is built to work with your GIS data. It's available within all the places that you would work with data, such as the ones that are listed here. And then we will give the disclaimer that it's not a replacement for the strength of geoprocessing or Python geoprocessing. It is lightweight, which we'll kind of be getting into a little bit more within our demos and the slides. So you can think of Arcade as an in-map calculator. You give it an expression. You'll hear us use that phrase quite a bit today. Arcade will execute that on the fly, and the resulting value will almost act like any other field within your data. It'll transform your data into something else. And so it's doing this all on the fly. You can do anything from really simple, basic calculations. For example, I want to add two fields together, or you could get complex. You could write variables, you could set, you could use functions. There's a lot of different ways that you can use Arcade to customize your map in ways you might not have been able to do otherwise, which again, we'll also be covering that. You can almost think of it, like I mentioned, as an alternative to calculating a new field. That's not always the case, but we'll be showing you kind of how it almost acts like a field within your data. But why would you use Arcade? So here's a scenario. Someone hands you a data set and you're really excited to start working with it, and someone else owns that data set, or it's hosted and they have handed you a service and they forgot to add a field that you needed, or they used the wrong data type, and you're stuck in the normal GIS loop or just the normal workflow. You'd have to go back to them, say, hey, can you calculate this field for me? Can you redo this thing the way I need it? And it would then add to that cycle of, how fast you could be working with data. And with Arcade, that's no problem. It's easy to get started. You'll see that it's built to help you succeed in this data manipulation. You can use some of the built-in functions. You can get started very easily. You don't have to have coding background. And what's really cool about it is if you're using data that's changing often, Arcade, because it executes as soon as you open your map, if you have data that's changing often, your map will always stay up to date. And so that's a really cool feature as well, because you don't have to then, tell it to execute each time. It will actually do it for you. Expressions also carry through for your downstream applications. If you create something in Pro, it will then go to ArcGIS Online, which will then carry to your web maps and your web apps. And so what's nice about it is that it, in theory, you only have to create it once. It's also secure. There's a lot of safety features built into it so that, ultimately it's just a safe way to be building this data manipulation. And then it's also geospatial. I'll be showing an example of that. I'm sure others will as well, but it's a really powerful way to work with your data in really creative ways. I like to explain it as it's kind of Excel-like. If you can use Excel, you can use Arcade. The same way that you would tell Excel to do a function like rounding a variable or a data attribute by a decimal point, you can use a function called round in Arcade. You can reuse existing expressions. You don't have to use it. You don't have to write it twice. You can grab one and use it again. And then here's a few examples of things that you can do with it, and we'll be showing you quite a few of these today. A few examples of the things that you can do with Arcade. These examples you see here are specific to ArcGIS Online, but all of these things are fundamentally the same between the different parts of the product that you use it with. So you can use it to create a new variable to map. You can do it for pop-ups, rotation, labels. You'll be seeing obviously all of the attribute rules later. But you can, like I said, you can use it just like you would any other field in your data. And so here's an example of what it looks like in ArcGIS Online, but fundamentally it's the same everywhere that you use it. You will give it an expression, you will write something that Arcade will then execute, and you can, within that expression, use things like globals. These are things like the fields within your data set that already exist. You can use the built-in functions. There's so many of these, and they really help speed up your workflows. There's also constants such as pi and infinity, text formatting. I know you're going to see quite a few of those examples later. And ultimately, you can then test it to see what kind of result you're getting. And that's a really powerful way to troubleshoot your arcade expressions as you're building them. Once you're familiar with the arcade and you've done some of the basics, you can add some complexity. You have things like you can build variables, you can build your own functions, you can use for loops, you can do conditional statements. So if you're a little bit more familiar with coding, you can get quite advanced with the expressions that you write. You can essentially do related tables within a pop-up without ever having to do a join. You can perform pretty complex field calculations. You can grab data from other layers that aren't even in your data set. So you can pull data that doesn't exist within a data set and calculate a whole new field. One of the things I'll be showing, and I'm sure this will be talked about quite a few times today, is a feature set. And so just to give you a quick intro to this, a feature set is exactly what it sounds like. It is a set of features. And so when you access a feature set, you are accessing a full set of features that exist somewhere else. And you can use its geometry, you can use its fields, and it's a really powerful way to access data and use it within your existing content. And I'll give this disclaimer, it can be very powerful when used responsibly, especially in ArcGIS Online because everything's happening client side. And I'll reiterate, it's not a replacement for geoprocessing. Just use it responsibly. If you have 5 million records, you might be a little bit conscious of the performance of that. And with that, I'm just going to give you guys, I'm going to go straight into the demos of getting started with ArcGIS, or sorry, within ArcGIS Online. Can you guys see this thing at the top of my screen, or is it, oh well, we'll make it work. Technology is so much fun, right guys? I'm sure no one has run into any issues with Zoom or internet during these this crazy year that we've had.
These live captions are a good example of that.
Are they terrible?
They're pretty good, but there's some fun ones in there.
I've purposefully not been looking at them. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into this to show you guys some really basic examples, and I'm going to kind of build in complexity as I kind of introduce these concepts. So here in this map, we have census tracts in the Chicago area of the United States. And I want to show where the children who are under 6 years old who are living in poverty. And I want to map this variable. And so like within ArcGIS Online, I can go into the styles. So this looks a little bit different than it does in Pro, but I want to map a field from my data. So I would say, okay, I want to map the population who's under 6. It's in here somewhere in this huge long list. But I noticed that as I'm in this data set that the field, I'm sorry, I realize it's a little bit harder to find than I thought it was. Oh, here it is. So it's only giving me this variable as a count. And so a common practice with mapping demographic attributes especially is that it's better to normalize this attribute. And so I want to map this as a percentage, but I also want it to look really beautiful within my legend. And so I want to map a variable that does not exist in my data set. I want to calculate just a percentage. And so in ArcGIS Online, instead of mapping by a field, I can choose to map an expression. What happens here is that you get the expression window to show up, possibly. And so this is a really good place to explore your expressions and build them. And what I'm going to give a disclaimer is that by default, you'll see in a lot of places when you create a new expression, it'll be called custom, or new expression. I'm going to say this at the very beginning to set a best practice as you guys are all starting your arcade journey. Name your expression something meaningful from the start. That way, as you use it, again, it acts like a field. You want it to be named something useful. So if it says custom 1, new expression, you're not going to remember what's in that. And if someone uses it, they won't know what you're showing. As a caveat, it also is going to be what shows up in your legend if you're mapping for symbology. So it's definitely a good practice to name this something. So if I'm going to, for example, name this the percent under 6 in poverty. This right here is where you build your expression. This is you can think of this almost like a playground to whatever happens in this box right here when you're building your expression. Again, it'll look a little different in Pro. That's what's going to be what executes. And then your map will absorb whatever happens from your expression. You'll see in globals just mean the fields within your data. And these, essentially fundamentally, this is, I can access the values for every feature in my map. You'll notice it says $feature. That's just fancy speak for the feature in your map. So for each feature, this will execute. So for the example I was mentioning, I want to map this field, population whose income is below the federal poverty level who are under 6 years old, but I want to map it as a percent. So just like I would in Excel, I can build this expression. So I'm actually going to just click this. It'll actually add this field into my expression for me. I didn't have to type anything, you'll notice. And I want to just divide that by the total population for whom poverty status is determined. And then because I want this to appear as a percentage, I'll multiply it by 100. I hope you all feel like you could do something like this. I'm just building a percent. And in ArcGIS Online, I'm able to then click this blue test button and it'll say, oh, here's a resulting example of what this expression would return. So this is your basic 101 expression. I just built something that did not exist within my data set. And ArcGIS Online or whatever part of the product you're using will say, oh, you gave me a number. And so I'm going to map that just like any other numeric field within my data set. I can now just use this field and explore it. I'm immediately seeing some new interesting patterns. I mean, like I said, this field didn't exist, and now I'm suddenly seeing, wow, there's a really distinct pattern in the downtown area of Chicago. I wouldn't have been able to determine this otherwise. And so this is just a really basic example. Let's see if I can get to my next tab without getting rid of this little thing at the top. We'll get there eventually. All right, and so now I'm going to show you one other place that Arcade can be used, which is within labels. And I'm going to also introduce how to use the functions. So here I have elementary school districts within the Sacramento area in Northern California. And this is a great example of I'm using someone else's data. This data exists within the hub. This is open data. I brought this into my map to use it. And I use the name field within the labels to map. But you'll notice it's in all caps and it's a little bit rough on the eyes. I'm reading this like Pioneer Union Elementary. It's a little rough. So I would like to proper case this, but I don't own this data. And so this is a really good example for where I could use an expression. So I would click this little button right here in order to build an expression, and this window will start to look quite familiar to you. As is its naming, it's labeling the name field. I click test, sure enough, all caps. We don't want that. Let's instead build something new. Within functions, you'll see this huge list of different things that are built in for you. Again, this really makes it very Excel-like. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of the process. And you'll see there's quite a few different things that you can do in here. You're going to actually see a lot of these examples today. But I want to use the proper function. And in this environment, I'm able to click this little eye symbol to get built-in documentation. And this is really nice because I don't then have to go to a documentation website. It tells me right away that this function, you give it a value and you can apply it to either to every word or just the first word. And you've got, and it tells you what it's expecting and what it returns, text. So I can go ahead and add that in. In this environment, it even adds in the syntax right away, which is really nice. I'll go back to my globals and I'm going to replace this field or value with my feature called name. I'm going to apply this to every word. And now when I test, I get this beautiful proper case labeling. And just like any other field, when I click OK, now my map is beautifully labeled. And this took, 2 seconds to do, and is really worth it for the aesthetics of my map. I apologize for this little clunky jumping between the tabs. All right, so let's go one step further. Those were very, very basic examples, obviously. Here's another example where we'll use a conditional statement to simply change the look and feel of our map. Here are bike paths within the Sacramento area, and you'll notice that as it is built within the data that is pulled from, for example, open data, my bike classes are labeled as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very helpful for an end user. They know exactly what that means. Nope, actually, they don't. So how would we then turn this field, this cryptic field, into something meaningful for our end user, our end map reader? Well, if I then switch this to another layer, this one, you'll notice that now these classes are just described as something a little bit more beautiful. How was this done? This was done within Arcade. And you'll notice if I edit it, just like it appears just like any other field, but then it'll open this Arcade window. Here we got just one step further. We created a variable called bike class, which we set to be that $ feature of the bike class of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We then used a conditional statement, which is actually built right into these functions. I'll actually show you this one just to help you out a little bit. This is like an if else. If something, do something. Or if something else, do something else. And so the when function is a really powerful way to do these conditional statements. And so you'll see in this example, when it's 0, name it unpaved trail. When it's 1, bike path, class 1. Again, this is a really simple way to really enhance the look and feel of your map. And it just used this as a unique symbol, and now our map looks a little bit more easy to read. Now, let's do something really exciting. Let's start to combine all of these basics into something a little bit more advanced. Now we're seeing bus stops and how they align with those bike paths. You'll notice that if I click on one of these ones that does not look like it's near a bike path, if I go ahead and click on one of these, in my pop-up, it actually is telling me there are no dedicated bike paths within a quarter mile of this stop. Whereas if I click on one of these ones that's on a path, you'll see there's a bike path within a quarter mile of this stop. We're giving an informative piece of information, and this is actually being calculated using a geometry function within Arcade. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If I go within that layer and I want to set the pop-up for that layer, so now you've seen it with you've seen Arcade within symbology, you've seen it within labeling, you can also use it within your pop-ups. If I look at the expressions that I have within this layer, I see I've built one already. And this one, this looks a little complicated, but essentially what this is doing is using the set of features that are the bike paths. That's what this one is right here. Within my map, I am then going to buffer my bus stops, intersect them with my feature set, and then count them. So that's a lot of words to essentially say, determine if there is a bike path within a quarter mile of each bus stop. That's all this expression is doing. And then count how many there are. And as if there's 0, you say there are none. And if there's at least 1, say there is a bike path within a quarter mile. And in this case, instead of using when, I used if, which is essentially just if else. That's all this function is doing. This is another example of a conditional statement that's just telling the expression window to do one thing or another, and it will return whatever the last thing in this expression tells you to do. And so if this seems a little complicated, I'm actually going to just go ahead and show you how I would build something like this. So here's an example where I turned it into a word, a phrase. But imagine I just want to count how many bike paths are within a half mile of each bus stop. I'm going to go ahead and just show you how to build that. So I would add a new expression. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this example text list in here. And I'm going to, like I mentioned, name this something meaningful so that I can then use it later and it'll make sense to me. And I'm going to start writing my expression. I was talking about the use of variables. This is just something to store something that I'll use later. So if I want to create a variable of a feature set, that's just a container, something that's going to hold the set of features that I want to access. And so in this example, this is the pop-up for the bus stops. And I want to show where the bus stops intersect with the bike paths. So if I go into $map, I can actually access all the other layers within my map. And so in this example, I want to access the set of features that are the bike paths. So in this environment, I can literally just click this. It built it for me. If I was doing this in Pro or in another environment where I maybe didn't have this available to me, I could also just type this in or use the functions like you saw me use before. But this is a nice, simple way. So I know I mentioned that the expression will give you whatever happens in the last line, but you can also use what's called a return statement. So if I told this arcade expression to return me that variable fs I just created, if I tested this, this is showing me that it is returning me a feature set. So what that means is it's returning that set of features. And you'll see this is that data set exactly as I would see it within the map. This is all those lines. That's not what we want. What we want to do is then intersect that with a half-mile buffer of the bus stops. So now I'm going to create a variable called buff. So these are my buffers. So if I go back into my functions and I look for buffer and I look at this function, you'll see I want to give it a geometry, a distance, and a unit, and it will return me that buffered polygon. So I can add this in. It's going to do it on my current feature, which is what $feature means. And I want to do this by half a mile. So now if I tell it to return that buff variable I just created, it will give me a polygon. Okay, so now I have my buffered bus stops and I have my set of features right here available to me within my expression. Now I want to do is see where those two things intersect. And again, within the functions list, we have a function called intersects. And what that does is it takes two geometries and it will tell you yes or no if they intersect. So if I now use the intersects and instead of using the existing feature, I want to use that buffer I just created against the bike paths, what this will return to me is a set of all of the intersecting bike paths that overlap with that buffered bus stop. And you'll see in this example, I have 5 different things and it is still a feature set. This is giving me a set of features. That's not something I can return into a pop-up. So what I want to do is count these. And just like we've done a few times, I'm going to set one more variable where I'm actually going to use the count function, which will literally just check how many things are in here. So if I test this, now we have a number. We now have something that is digestible and easy to use within our pop-up. And so I hope this kind of helps show you how you can build and test these. This return function is really very valuable. And now we have something that we can use. So now that I've created this and I know it returns me a number, I could then use this like any other field within my data set. I could add some text to my pop-up and say, there are, and just like I would choose any other field, I would use this expression /XPR1 in this example, bike paths within a ½ mile of this bus stop. And so now when I click on one of these bus stops, it will tell me there are 27 bike paths within ½ mile of this. So we just used feature sets, geometry functions, variables, functions, all of those basics that I showed you in order to build something that is calculating right there on the fly. That did not even have to exist within my data set. And I know that we have a lot of other examples to show you, but I'm going to show real quick one that's going to maybe hit a little bit closer to home. You guys will be very familiar with what you see on the screen here, parcels. So how would you apply this to something that you're more familiar with? So here's an example of parcels within San Bernardino County. And let's just say at its most basic, I want to map the improvement value of my parcels. So I would say, okay, I want to map my field improvement value. And when this comes in, you'll see, oh my goodness, this does not look like a map I can use. And if I go and look a little bit deeper into this improvement value variable, I see whoever hosted this gave it to me as a string. That's not useful to me. I want to map its value. So here's where we enter the wonderful world of Arcade. I can instead use, oops, I'm going to go back real quick because that'll be not what I want. Instead of using that field, I will use an expression. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, again, name my expression. I'm going to say it over and over. And in this case, I want to see what this feature, what this field improvement value is giving me. Sure enough, when I test it, it's giving me a string. And I notice it's this darn comma that's causing me my pain. So as I've shown you a handful of times, I'm going to go ahead and use a function just like Excel, where I'm going to replace that darn comma with nothing on that field improvement value. So now I get the comma's gone. Yay. Oh, but it's still a string. Oh no. Oh, that's okay. We have another function for that. It's called number. And this one will convert a value into a number. That's what we want. So I'm going to just go ahead and add that into this statement. And now, I have a number. I can now actually start to map this variable. So now I'll choose that. And I can actually start to explore this data just like I would any other numeric attribute. And I can start to actually see the patterns within my data. So it's a really easy way to convert data that maybe was given in a different format. Oh, sorry, I have one more quick thing. I know I talk quite a lot, but what if we wanted to show the improvement value as the land value as a % of the land and the improvement value? Here's an example where I created a map, that shows this pattern as a %. And so any value that's over 50% is brown and anything that's underneath is green. And this was built with an Arcade statement that did exactly what we just mentioned, where it replaced that darn comma and turned it into a number for both the land and the improvement value fields. It then set a variable and used that when function you saw to then return an answer. So our expression is returning us an answer. And when we test this, it's a number that didn't exist within our variable. It used variables that were strings and we turned them into numbers. It did all of this data conversion. And then we were able to create a new variable that was mapped within our data set. And so what I'll just real quick finish off is that this actually exists as a blog if you wanted to see how to do something like this. My teammate Jim Harries actually created a blog that describes exactly how to make that last map. And so this is available on the ArcGIS Online blog site. And so you could easily access that if you wanted to. I'll real quick end with this set of resources. If you're just getting started, if you didn't listen to anything that I just said, or you were going to forget it because it's a holiday, one place for resources is this tiny URL that you see right here, esriurl.com/arcade resources. It contains a lot of different GitHub examples, how to get started with Arcade, the documentation, how to use Arcade for mapping, as well as all of the blogs. And so anything that's tagged Arcade. And so if you can't remember anything, at least try and access this link at the end, and you'll be able to be mapping with Arcade before you know it. And I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to hand this off to someone else. But first, I wanted to address maybe any of the questions that were about that introduction that I had.
There's one question that came in the chat there. Lisa says, is there a way to calculate or convert to easting or westing values using latitude or longitude values in ArcGIS Online using Arcade expressions?
That's a good question. If it's a field within your data set, I would assume you could do something along those lines. Amir, Jason, Amy, do you guys have any thoughts on this one?
I think so. We're working now, not we, the Arcade team is working now on unit conversion and formatting, like the degrees, minutes, seconds, and so on to other formats. But I don't know that we have the ability to use projection engine, if that's the idea, to use a state plane to geographic and so on. But that's a good one. And any idea that you have, I just recommend putting on the ideas on GeoNet. And if it gets enough votes, then it will be a possibility. And we have access, but the beauty about Arcade is that we have access to all the geometry function that ArcGIS uses. So anything in that regard is possible.
Yeah, and so I just showed a basic one, buffer. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different ones available. You can do distance, you know, you can do area. There's lots of different things you can do with the geometry functions. I guess I should have spent more time on that, but I'm sure Amir will.
I'm not sure. Yeah, you put a high bar there, Lisa. So again, the purpose here is that to prove to you guys that Arcade is something that is useful to learn. It's easy to start with, and that there's many more resources once you get started. Okay, so I think Lisa covered a lot of this, so I'm just going to go over them quickly, and we're going to see some other places where they're being used. I'll just mention there's a thing called profile. So Lisa showed some, we saw the global called feature, which means the current feature you're working against. But that's a type of a global, and that global is available in most profiles, almost in all of them. But there's another global called map, for example, $map, and that one is only available in the context of the map, not in the context of a table or a feature class like a geodatabase site. So we'll see how profiles do matter. And there's a place to play around with those things called the playground. And this is the URL developers arcgis.com/arcade. And the function reference and the playground is there. So we're going to do a very quick start there just to show you how it looks, and then switch directly into ArcGIS Pro. So I'm going to close this and bring in the playground for quickly in here. And not Google, here's the Arcade. And now that we have the Arcade, I have the cheat sheet. Let's just do some quick examples. So here you can see those profile we talked about. So I'm just going to go with the default profile here and access the function, the constant that Lisa showed. And just to say that if you type something like hello world and press test, it's smart enough to know that this is what you return. So it has implicit return. So I could also put this as a return statement. And of course, it would return that. And a good practice to put a semicolon, and then it knows where the line ends. But I could also make it into a variable called a equals hello world. And you can also do this var b equals world. And then functions like you use with Python, maybe a plus b var c equals a plus b. It will know that c is a hello world, and I can do return c, and you will see that it should return c. So I didn't do something right. I didn't spell it right. So another thing that helps is that the colors of the text change if you write something wrong. And this is a good place to test your stuff because it's lightweight and it's available immediately. So I'm going to go over 2 different examples. Let's say I have an area in square feet, and we come from the parcel team, so we have some of course affinity to parcels. So let's say the area, and you can see that I put the area and it changed color, which means it's a reserved word. It's actually a function. So I want to stay away from that. I'm going to call my variable parcel area. And it doesn't matter if another thing nice about Arcade, I can put uppercase, lowercase. It's not sensitive like Python. And let's say I had 50,000 square feet and I want to return something in acres. So I have to take my parcel area. And you can see that I'm not case sensitive here, and that's okay. And I can divide it by 43,560. And now I should have the area in acres, okay? So it's not case sensitive and it still worked. Let's try to do it on real parcel data. And we're gonna go now to ArcGIS Pro. And there's more ways you can test it, by the way. So I can put like one of the profiles here, and I can get to some variables potentially and see how that would work. You can even edit the feature, but we're going to skip now and go to ArcGIS Pro, and we have here a map, and I'm going to go and add a polygon class called text parcels in.
We
Yep.
don't see oh, we see it now. There it is.
Okay.
Take a little bit.
Latency. I'm going to try to take it slowly then. And I'm going to add a polygon class to this current map. And it has a sample data. And here it is. It shows a wonderful color. I'm going to stay with it. The first thing we're going to see, we're going to symbolize it, let's say differently, the small parcels and the big parcels. So the first place where you can apply Arcade is in the symbology by unique values, similar to what Lisa showed. I'm going to go to my symbology pane, and I'm going to choose unique value renderer. And instead of using the name field to do that, I'm going to press on an expression here. And let's say that I want the feature to be symbolized differently if it's big or small. Let's say that big is more than half an acre. So, and we have a field here called stated area. So I'll double click on that. My mouse needs some support here. If feature stated area, that's how you access a specific field in Arcade, is bigger or equal to half an acre, which is 21,780 square feet. Then I'll open a curly bracket, go down a line, and you know what? I can also make it bigger so you can all see it better. So why don't we do that? What do we want to do if it's bigger than half an acre? So if it's bigger, I can return a string called big. I'm just going to do that and close the curly bracket. That's the end of the if statement. Otherwise, I want to return small. And good practice to also have semicolons in the end, and you can validate your expression, and it passed. That'd be an embarrassment if it failed already. And we can see that we have 2 wonderfully colorized values here. And you can, of course, make that expression much more complex. And Lisa can help me with the cartography, and we'll have a wonderful map that shows big and small parcels. Okay, so let's try to label those parcels. And the stated area, we know it's in square feet, so we want to show the area, let's say, let's calculate. There's a field here that I already created. We want to calculate that field into area in acres. So we open the attribute table, and if we scroll all the way to the right, we'll see that there's a stated area in acres field. It's a double, and we want to select that stated area and do the same thing we did in the playground, but use the calculate field. So by default, you'll see Python. And my first reaction when I heard about Arcade is like, why do we need now to learn another language? I already know Python. I'm happy with Python. Why do we need to do that? And the reasoning is simple. If I now create a label expression in Pro, I know that it can work on the web. If I do create a pop-up, it will also work on a web or mobile application, where you wouldn't install Python on a mobile application on a web browser, right? So that's one reason. It's lightweight. And the second thing, it's secure. Unlike JavaScript, it looks very similar to JavaScript, but it's more secure than JavaScript. So that's another reason to use Arcade. And then the rich access to all the functions you need makes it easier to get started, like where Python requires more overhead. So let's recalculate the area here. We're using the Arcade, not the Python. And I can just do, we wanted the stated area divided by the number of, divided by, oops, again. I'll make it bigger so everybody can see. Divided by the number of square feet in an acre, which is this one. And if we can do just that, and that would be good enough. You can put a return or not. That's called implicit return, and it's calculating those values. So it did that, but let's sort it in ascending way, and we have some zeros here. If we look at the original value, we'll see that the stated area is actually for them is null. We don't want to replace nulls with zero because they have two different meanings, and we actually wanted to keep the value as null for if it was null. So let's discard this edit operation and try to modify that. Okay, so let's calculate the field again, but this time we want to make sure that we only do that if there's a value there. So we're going to use another function. I'm going to switch again to the Arcade profile called isEmpty. And isEmpty will return if there's a null, it returns true. So I'll make it a bit bigger so we can see it here. And we can use now a variable. So the function is called isEmpty. And if you type it in the expression builder, you'll see that it immediately changes colors. So, and then we want to put the stated area here. So let's check first if there's any value inside. So that will return true if it's empty. We actually want the reverse thing. So instead, we'll put an if statement, but tell it to not be the opposite. By putting exclamation mark, it will return the opposite. So if it's not empty, I actually want to do the calculation, right? And you can do it in one line or two lines. I'll do it more explicitly in 2 lines. If you add more lines, it's actually sometimes easier because then you can easily find when you debug it, if you have a mistake, you know where the problem is. And again, we'll do what we did before. And you can see I'm using the same round that Lisa showed to return it in a number of decimal places. So we want to round this value into 2 decimal places. But we didn't, of course, we have to divide it first. So divided by 43,560. So that will return this value. And now we can close the if statement. And if we don't do anything, it's fine. But if you really want to make sure that you return null otherwise, you just write return null. And you can see when When I type the second L, it changes color. That means that it knows what it is. We can evaluate it and it's fine. And we can say, okay, and now we should get nulls for the values that were null, 0 when it was 0, and all the values are rounded to 2 decimals. So, and you can of course format that field format to show 2 decimals if you wanted to show that. So that's an example how you can use Arcade for field calculation. The next thing I want to show you is how you can use it for a pop-up. So in Pro, you can right click on the layer and go to configure pop-ups. And that's actually very handy when you also testing. There's many fields that are showing now here. So I don't want to see all the fields. I'm gonna only want to see the name and the stated area. Let's say that's good enough. So now if we click, we should only see a few fields, as you can see. And we're going to add another custom expression here on the button. So say new, and I'm afraid from Lisa, so I'm going to give it a meaningful name now. And we want to return the area in acres, right? So area acres. And the expression is the same expression and the same one we used before even to calculate, right? So I'm just going to copy it's exactly the same expression that we used before. If it's not empty, return this value rounded to 2 decimals, otherwise return nothing. So we can press OK on that. And now when we click on a feature, you can see that it is returning 0.52 acres on the big parcel. On the small parcels, of course, it's less than half an acre. So pop-ups, like you saw Lisa show as well, is another great place to use Arcade. Also a good place to test your expressions because you don't need to save it into a feature class and so on. It's immediate, or to a label class. And talking about labels, let's see how we can label those guys. So if I select a layer in Pro, it's contextual. You should see the labeling tab. And in here, if you press label, now we can see all the parcel names. And they are pretty long. So let's say that I wanted to see the name of the parcel name, which is this APN, assessor parcel number. And I wanted to see the stated area. And there's another field that has the area unit, and that field has a domain. So I don't want to see the domain code. I want to see the actual unit. And I want to see it in a label. So I'm going to press this button here to go into the expression of the label. And instead of returning $feature.name, let's start creating some more variables. So the first variable is name, and the name is equal to the feature name. So, okay. And the second variable, we call it the stated area, and it's the same name as the field. That's the stated area here, $feature stated area. And I'll make it bigger so everybody can see. I'm sorry. If it's too small, just stop me. And you can see the second one is area unit. Area is reserved, so it changes color. But as soon as we put unit there, it knows it's not a function, and that's the stated area unit. And when I double click this one, it immediately identifies that this field has a domain attached to it and adds this function called domain name, which means I don't want to see the code. I want to see the string, the description that represents that code. And it creates this domain name of $feature and the name of the field. So that's great. I'm going to get the unit. And now I can build my label. So var label. And if any one of you did any labeling with Python, it looks very familiar, right? So I just have to concat those together plus the stated area. And I don't have to worry about case sensitivity because it's Arcade, and I can verify that it's working and it's valid. Let's press apply and see what we get. Label. We didn't return anything, so we get nothing. We deserve it. Return label. and press apply. And now we can see this wonderful label expression, and I'm being facetious. But okay, so we have the parcel name, we have square foot and some another number concat, so that's of course not good enough. So let's change it. We only want the 4 last digits of the APN. So that's easy to fix. Let's start fixing this right. We just want the last 4 digits. So only the right 4 digits, that's great. And we want another thing that we want is the square foot value to be on a new line. So we're gonna fix it by using something called text formatting. And the text formatting command, of course, there's too many T's, so it didn't change color, is only available in the profile of labeling. So text formatting.newLine will give me a new line, and we can test it. And we can see now last 4 digits and square foot, but there's a missing space there. They are jammed into another. So we can fix that as well by putting a small space there. So let's see where we can put that. We can put it here in between, or we can put it after stated area. We can just put plus another empty string here, apply, and it moved a bit. So that's starting to look better, but I want maybe the parcel name to be bold. So we can make it bold. We can add it bold by using a tag called bold. So I want everything bold from here until here. So add a plus, and now I'm going to do the same bold thing, but with a closing tag, like HTML, if you know. And let's see if that works. Plus this one, valid, yes, apply, and now we have the parcel name bold. And there's many more tags you can use to make it italic, underlined, bigger font, different type of font, different color, etc., etc. So things you know from Python maybe or VB, very similar here. And now that we have that, let's try to take it to the next level. So now we want to potentially, we want to keep everything we did here, but if we wanted to, we want to check that the area, and if it's bigger than a certain area, we want to display this value instead of 39,000. If it's bigger than half an acre, which was 21,000 square feet something, we want to show the area in acres, not in square foot. So for interest of time, I'm just going to copy paste another if statement and plug it here. So we can just declare the variable called label, and we don't have to put any value in it yet, and then say something. If the stated area is bigger than half an acre, label is the name, plus round the stated area to acres, convert it, plus add the acre value. And another thing you can see here is an else statement. Otherwise, label equals to what we had before. We don't need this line anymore. And if I want to document it for myself, by the way, // is area in native unit. Okay, so you can add comments in your code. So if you later have to go to visit that, you can. And let's see how that would look now. Now we can see that this value is in square foot and this one is in acres. So this is all great, but we can see that there's a parcel here that shows square foot, but there's nothing here. So it has no stated area. And this is what happened here, is that we didn't check for that. So we can just check for that by introducing another return over here. We can have multiple returns in a statement, right? So we can say, listen, check if it's empty. If the stated area is empty, just return the name. We don't need the rest. So that means nothing will be executed from here downwards. So we can check that. And sure enough, now we can see we just have the parcel name here. So did I show you everything with labeling? I think so. So that's a quick way to show you a bit about labeling. Can it get more complicated? Yes, it can actually. So if you're using the parcel fabric, for example, it comes with a lot of predefined symbology or Kogo lines. And Kogo lines, if we just look at the Kogo lines, let's look on the lines and the Kogo expression there for labels. You'll see that you can even build functions and take it to another level. You can see a radius and length, and it knows if it's a curve or not a curve. And if we look at the expression here, you'll see that there's an area here called settings that lets you set. Instead of having people know about Arcade and so on, we even exposed an area where you can, do you want to see curves or not? Do you want to see distances? Which color do you want to use? With abbreviations, what format, what color? And then there's a big area that's actually going to get shorter very soon in the next release, because we have here a thing called function that takes a north azimuth and turn it into quadrant bearing. So this whole block will go away. There's another function that knows to take a bearing in decimal degrees and convert it to degree, minutes, seconds, and format that. So that piece also is going to go away, because it's going to replace with one line of Arcade that's going to come with 2.8. And then there's other things. So all to make it look nice and pretty, and that's a more advanced way to use Arcade. We even use Arcade here for custom symbology, for pop-ups, for display expressions, for many other things. So I think that was it. And are we on time? I think we're pretty much on time, or not. No, we are behind time. So I'm going to switch now to attribute rules and see how we can use attribute rules. So a bit about, we saw how we saw that Arcade is used in many different places in ArcGIS Pro, and why it's useful to use them, how to declare variables, how to return, how to document things. We'll share these slide decks with you, how you can create an if statement. And we saw an if else. You can also create for loops if you needed to. So while it's a small, lightweight expression language, there's a lot you can do with it. We saw with labels the bold command, but you can change the font name and the size of the font. You can change the colors, all from within Arcade. The IIF is another one where you can put a condition and determine the result if true, and then the result if false. So that's another way. If you know that you have if do something, then do something else, you can put it instead in one line with the IIF condition. So that's pretty neat. We talked about a bit about profiles, and it might become more clear when we talk about attribute rules soon. Just be aware of them, and especially if things work in pop-up and you take the business logic and you try to put it somewhere else and it doesn't work, then it's usually because you're using some global in the wrong type of profile. That's where I would look first. So to attribute rules, crash course, introduced in ArcGIS Pro 2.1 a long time ago. It's built in the geodatabase functionality. It's actually stored as part of the feature class definition. So when, just like the field names and so on, and the schema, it's part of the schema. That means that if you copy and paste it from one environment to the other, it just moves with it, which is great. They are built for efficiency. You can automatically populate attributes. If you use them to calculate fields, make sure that aware that there's importance to the order of the fields, right? Because if you based field C is A plus B and field D is C plus B, and for example, the order matters. They are used for quality. I call it preventive. So constraints rule will prevent the feature from being created if it's invalid in your eyes. So you can put constraints rules. You can check existing features. Maybe you got it from a digital submission, somebody else gave it to you. You can, or to your existing data, you can just create a rule and see where the rule is being violated. They are configurable, and you can decide when they are being triggered. And we'll see that there's an insert, update, and delete are the common triggers. But for validation, it's when the user wants to run them, as well as for batch rules. So Here you can see the type of rules, and the calculation rules have two types. The one that operate, that execute immediately when a trigger is triggered. So that could be those triggers we talked about, the insert, creating a new features, update of a feature, or deleting a feature. But then there's another type that you can create called batch calculation. And those are mostly for those things you don't need to have immediately, and or potentially could take some long time to calculate. So for those guys, it'd be better to offset them, let's say to run them as a script every midnight. As well as the validation rules, they don't kick off anytime, every time you create a new features. They wait until somebody validates them, and Amy will show it later. The constraint rules prevent bad data from getting into the system. They are immediate, and they will prevent you from saving the feature to the database. The client will do that work. And I will just say use them with caution, because sometimes we'll see it later with a demo, I hope. If you are putting too many constraints, you'll make editing pretty hard on yourself. As well as some data flows, you get data from an external source, and now you cannot save it because it doesn't meet the criteria. And then the calculation here, you can see that it has two types. One of them is immediate, and we'll do an example of that, and the one that is batch. There's a field in the feature itself, not that tells it if it is already been calculated or not. So if you have 1 million records and you brought 10,000 more, it knows to run it only on those 10,000 that were not calculated yet. So you can think about it as dirty features. This is how it optimizes performance and validation as well. If you validated a certain data and it's already been validated, then you don't validate it again. Only the new features will be validated, and that's using a field, and that field is not hidden. You can see, and you can even change the value of that field if you want to force something to be reevaluated. If you know Attribute Assistant in ArcMap, is it better? Yes, it is. It's much faster. It's built into the geodatabase. That means that different clients potentially can run it, right? It's still catching up on some other clients, like runtime for mobile, but we're getting there. You can push some of the calculations to happen on the server instead of on the client as well. There's geoprocessing tools that allow you to automate them. And many times you can steal business logic from a label expression, like we saw before, a pop-up, and put in as part of the calculation rule, reuse the same logic. And it's a core technology, of course. You don't need another installation of anything. It comes with ArcGIS. And we don't have much time, but I'm going to do a few quick demos, and I'm not going to type them this time. I'm just going to cheat with my cheat sheet here with attribute rules. So let's start with a quick calculation rule. So I'm going to show you, here's a map of parcels, and there's book and page system here. So basically where data is being printed to the tax map books. And I have a field on the tax layer that is called book and page. And what I want to do is calculate the value. So I can have a pop-up that intersects and tell me the value. But in this case, we want to create a rule that fires every time you update a feature. And it's going to, let's see that field. Where is that field? Validation status. It's not here yet, I guess. Book page. Oh, it is here, book page. So a field called book page, and we want to calculate, add an attribute rule that would calculate it based on intersection with another layer. And that's very common. So we're going to add this rule to the tax polygons. And we're going to design an attribute rules view. I can close this. And we are going to add, let's put it up on top here. Nice and big. It's a calculation rule. We're going to add a rule, and we're going to call it book page. And I'll do it quickly. It must have a name. If you have subtypes, you can choose which subtypes to run it on. And the field is called book page. Here it is. And now we're going to copy some business logic that I'm going to explain. the expression builder. And let's look at the expression, what it does. So again, it creates a feature set, which is a collection of features, but we need to access this layer here, the other layer, book and page. It doesn't happen in the map, it happens in a geodatabase. And because of that, we don't use $map, we use $data store. Think of data store as your geodatabase. And then we have to tell it what's the name of the feature class in this geodatabase. It's called book page. If using an enterprise geodatabase, make sure to use the fully qualified name here. Okay, so the 3 strings with a dot between them for the fully qualified name. And then which fields do we want to return? There's 2 fields in this layer, book and page. One is called book, the other one page. We want both. And do we want the geometry to be returned? Yes, we do, because we want to intersect against it. So this is how we access the book page and create a feature set out of that. Which book and page do we want? We want the one that intersects against a specific feature. So we put the feature and the feature set, and we find the intersect. We expect to get only one, but theoretically it could be multiple book and pages, of course, overlapping. In this case, there do not. So we want the first one. And we also account for the case if it's empty. So only if it's not empty, we don't want to get null values. If it's not empty, we return this formatted string, book equals book page dot book, and page equals to book page dot page. So this is how you access those 2 fields we just retrieved. It's validated, yes, okay. When do we want to do it? We want to do it every time you create a new parcel or update existing one. And let's see that we can save it. If you have an editing, pending edits on your data and your schema, then you have to save or discard them first to remove that block. And now we are storing that as part of the feature class definition. That means any map that is created from this database will honor those settings. So it's not dependent, could be multiple maps, right, from one feature class. So it's saving it to the feature class. In this case, it's a file geodatabase. Validation is supported from 2.7 onwards, so latest release basically right now. So it has been saved. Let's check if it works. So I'm going to select a parcel. Let's not select the book and page, just a parcel here. Open the attribute window. This one already has a value, so we don't need to see those for a second. Okay. Let's find some parcels that don't have that value yet. I guess I probably calculate them all. So here's one. Let's select it. So it doesn't have a value. Let's zoom to it. Let's see if there's a book and page in the background here. Okay. So that's on the edge. It should be. So let's trigger an update by changing the name. And immediately you can see it fetched book 1A08 and page 2.9 and populate this field. So it's super fast, super efficient, and it makes sure that every time you create a new parcel, I can create also a new parcel here. So I'll just create a parcel on some book and page here and look at the attributes. And sure enough, it has the same book and page populate on the fly. So we did an insert and update, and the delete is less useful for us. So that's an example of an attribute rule for calculation. But let's say that we wanted to put a constraint to make sure that the parcel has a name in it. So again, we can go to design and attribute rules. And in here, instead of calculation, we can add a constraint rule, add a new rule, and I can call it must have name. For time, I'm just going to go quickly here. And so this one will make sure that we have a name in the parcel, just return. Okay, so you could put if is empty. If it's empty, return. So I'll first, constraint rules and validation rules, if they return true, it's good. If they return false, it's a problem. So if it doesn't have a name, it's a problem. and it will not let that feature go into the database. And we can do it in two ways. We can put a long if statement. If it's empty, return false, otherwise return true, or we can do it in one line. I'm going to show you the long way soon. It passed. You must have an error number, and you must have an error message here. And that is something the user will see. The name, and we want to do it every time you, let's say, insert and update. And I'll show you the problem with that soon. And we cannot save it here because we have pending edits. So in here, I'm just going to discard the edits we did before. And now we can go back to the attribute rules and save it. And we are a bit over time. I'm going to continue 5 more minutes, and then we're going to switch to Amy. And just show you one of each, and then we can show you some of the validation later. So we apply a constraint rule here, saving the changes. Okay. It's saved. So now we can try to create a parcel without a name like we did before. I'm going to create another parcel here without a name. And sure enough, it tells me error number must have a name. In order to create a feature with a name, the only way is to go and create an override value. So you can do that by pressing on that arrow in the feature template and give it a name. And now if I were to create it, it would let me create it. Of course, usually you don't create roundabouts in 2 clicks. So it would be very annoying to work on a feature that's a subdivision and discover in the end that you couldn't commit it. So in this case, I would argue not to use insert with a constraint, only potentially update, right? It will also, of course, fire if somebody wanted to update now an existing parcel here and take away the name, right? So if we go to the attributes here and we try to remove the name by deleting it, press enter, again, it tells me that it's caught it because an update operation and it must have a name. If we look in another data set, okay, I'm going to show you on the other data set that we had before here, there's some parcels called, not this one, it's actually this one. There's some parcel here that's called RW, and this is for right away parcels. So you can also put, and I'm going to show you the cheat sheet now because we are running out of time. We could have, and they have a business logic there that the APN number must be 9 characters long, not 8 and not 10, exactly 9. So it can either be something with 9 characters or RW, and you can basically use Arcade to mimic your specific and configure it to your business needs. So make sure that if it's not empty, empty is fine, but in cases where it's not empty, then check if it is RW, and this is or, the count, the number of characters in the string is 9. And we did it here in one quick return statement with a condition. So if the condition is met, it basically will turn here false or true based on the condition. So that's how you would do that. And I just want to tell you that you can also use Arcade with SQL expressions, and that kind of ties to Lisa's comment about the size of the data and what you're doing. So checking for unique values in a database, regardless if you're using Arcade or Python, will be expensive if you have a lot of data. That's a unique statement is expensive, but validation rules don't execute as you enter the data. So they could be a good candidate for those because the user runs them. And in here, again, we create a parcel feature set. So feature set by name, and we go to the tax parcels. We just look at the name, so we just bring in the name field, and we don't need the geometry, so that is false. The parcel name is the current feature name. So that's the current parcel name, and we want to make sure that that parcel name is unique within the database. So we construct a SQL query that says name equals to parcel name, and we only want to make sure that the parcel name is unique with the non-historic parcels. And non-historic parcels are parcels that have retired by record empty, so they haven't been retired yet. So we create this SQL statement basically dynamically, and then we use a filter command that we apply on this feature set to bring all the parcels that have this name in the database and are not retired. And we expect that number of parcels to be returned, of course, to be 1. So here we check that we're only checking for current parcels that are not the RW, right? Because if it was an RW question, RW parcel, there could be multiple of that. So we make sure that it's not one of those. If it's not one of those, just return the number of the count of this should be 1. And it will just, if you return that, it will be, it's a statement, it's a logical operator, so a conditional operator. So it will be, if it's 1, it's true. If it's something else than 1, it's false. And this is basically going to make sure as a validation rule if it passes or not. So this is example how you use a SQL query within Arcade as a validation rule and see the error features. So that was the demo piece. To sum it up, we saw this example. We talked about that. We saw constraint parcel must have a name, very easy. This is the long way to show it, right? I showed you the one-liner, but this would be more explicit. That would be better, actually. We saw this example, how to constrain it to only the parcels that have 9 characters or are called RW. We saw this right now about the unique name with the filter. I didn't show you those examples, and we're just going to share those slide deck with you later. And there's many more examples there. And with that, if there's questions here, I might take 1 or 2, but then we'll jump.
Yeah, there's basically just 2 questions, Amir. I can ask them really quick. Isn't it true that you do not need to return the geometry for feature set by name when running a simple intersect analysis?
It is true, Hunter. Good observation. I noticed it myself. And the geometry piece, when you return it, is especially worth save. Makes when you use feature services, it's another incentive why you don't want to return the geometry if you don't need to. So good observation. Certainly some advanced people in the crowd.
And then the last question here is: would this work in ArcGIS Online as well, and carry across to features being edited in the field with mobile applications?
Okay, so there's online, which is a web browser, JavaScript, and there's a runtime, which is the mobile apps. Some of the things would work now, and some of the things don't work. It depends where they're being evaluated. If you're online, working against the server, you have the options when you create a new attribute rule to exclude from client evaluation, meaning it will run on the server. If you check that box and you are connected to your server, it will actually not run in your client, it will run on the server, and that should work. If you want it to run on your client, some methods will work, some not. I don't know exactly which release. We are pushing this functionality to the runtime as we speak, as well as for utility networks. So depending on the version of runtime, some things might work, some things might not work yet. But the idea is that they will work across the board. So once configured in Pro, published, made available to other clients, we want it to work in the other clients. And by the way, we'll talk about resources later, but these examples and the cheat sheet and the source data are already shared actually as part of the Land Records meetup. We'll send you pointers to that location. And I'm going to stop presenting. Where is that little stop share? Okay, and I'll pass it on to Amy, and then we'll do a quick wrap up and take a break.
Perfect. Thank you, Amir. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we're going to talk about the parcel fabric just real quick. At ArcGIS Pro 2.7, we shipped parcel fabric specific attribute rules. We came up with these rules as another component of quality management for the parcel fabric. The type of attribute rules that we shipped consists mostly of validation type rules, which Amir went over.
Amy,
You
are
can-
you sharing your screen?
Yes, I believe I am.
Am I the only one not seeing it? That's okay.
I'm not seeing it either, Amy.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm also not seeing it.
Oh, okay, there we go. There's a little share button.
Oh.
Are we all good?
Yep.
And you're seeing my map?
Sheboygan. I think,
Sheboygan, yes.
which state is that in?
I believe it's Wisconsin.
Okay.
So anyway, the attribute rules that we shipped, you can opt into these rules and configure them to meet your business requirements. And then also these rules can actually, when you take a look at them, can help you guide you as you become more familiar with Arcade and attribute rules so you can create your own. So let's take a look. Here I am. I'm the administrator for the parcel fabric at Sheboygan County, and I would like to apply some of these validation rules to my fabric that meet our business requirements and to help with the overall quality of our parcel fabric. I have my map, my fabric in the map, and I want to take a look at some of the line validation rules and apply them to my conveyance division lines feature class here. I'm going to start by right-clicking on my conveyance division lines, and I go to design, and I can click on attribute rules. All right, so we're in the attribute rules view. This is the grid, this is the details pane. So like I said, we ship these with Pro 2.7. So I'm going to go ahead and we ship them, and they're located where you have ArcGIS Pro installed. So I'm going to go ahead and click on import, and mine happened to be installed on my C drive. So let me copy that real quick. Okay, so in the resources folder, there's attribute rules, and then obviously we have our parcel fabric specific rules. As you can see, we have connection line rules. These are all shipped as CSV files. We have parcel line rules, parcel polygon, points, and records rules. So I'm going to go ahead and import the parcel lines CSV. Let me go ahead and click OK. And while we wait.
So CSV is that a special format for parcels?
Nope, and this is how attribute rules are saved in a CSV file. And then so you can obviously share that with other folks, and they can import, even when you export, it's saved as a CSV file. So sorry about this. Okay, so once they're imported, like I said, we're in the validation of the attribute rules tab. I'm in the validation area of the rules that we shipped. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to choose one for this demo. So I'm going to choose the one that says must be longer than. So I want to find any short segments in my data. So once I click on this, the details window is just showing me the attribute rule, and I can go ahead and change the expression to meet my business requirements. And I've already done this. So I changed my unit is feet, and I want to find anything that's smaller than 0.25 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, and make sure when you do opt into these, the save button will appear, and make sure you save those once you have applied it to your line feature class. So now that I have this, I save my edits, and before I publish or give this to my editors, I want to make sure I add the attribute, the the attribute features to my map. So this is where you can find that. So in this case, I'm using a file geodatabase, and when I create a validation rule or I import, these validation features will be added to my geodatabase. Okay, so I'm going to switch hats here, and I am now the editor. And my admin has given me this map that has my validation features in the map. And so I was given this data as a CAD file, and I created parcels from the CAD file from the lines. So my workflow would be to copy the lines to. I went ahead and created seeds. I built these and I aligned them to my current parcel fabric. So these are lots. And since it was a CAD file, I now want to do some quality checks. So I can go ahead and right click on my conveyance division lines where we applied that attribute rule and add my air layers to the map. Okay, so once my air layers are added, this is a quality workflow. So I can go ahead and open the air inspector. And so this is what Amir was talking about. When you have validation rules, I can check these anytime I want by using the air inspector. But I have to make sure to add my air layers. So let's go ahead and click on my air inspector. And once that opens, you can see this is the area of interest that I just added to the map. So my air inspector has opened. Now the parcel fabric does have topology, GDB topology rules associated with it, but these are attribute rules. So here you just click on your air layers, and instead of validating the rules, I can evaluate the rules. So I'm going to go ahead and click on evaluate. Now remember, the rule that my admin gave me was to find little teeny short segments that can come from, a different data source, like in this case, a CAD file. So as you can see, I'm getting my rules back, and the line is too short, and these are really teeny. So I can highlight these in my map, and I can use the air inspector to zoom to the location where this air, or where we have this let's say this 0.13, crazy. So I can go through these and get the legal description, double check, and then go ahead and make sure that these are truly our errors that I need to fix. So this is just one example of how we can do quality checks on our parcel fabric with validation rules, with attribute rules that we shipped. And so you can configure them to, check them out, see if any of these apply. These will help you write your own. So that was my super quick demo, Amir.
Excellent. It looks easy. So
yeah.
I'll just wrap it up.
Perfect.
And maybe if you'll check the questions, see if there's any questions there. And then we can switch to the. So again, this is just an example of if there's a common rules in Wisconsin, you can create a CSV for Wisconsin and then share it with everybody to use. We did the same, and you see that we added a setting area for every rule that you need to potentially tweak to your business needs. And you don't have to import them all. You can import them all and then delete the one you don't want. So it's an opt-in model, basically, because we know that people have different business rules. Common question people ask, can they be exported and imported? You just saw how they can. So can they be automated? The import and so on. And yes, they can. There's a geoprocessing framework. You can see quite extensive to import, enable, evaluate, and etc. So you can automate, let's say, CAD digital submission processes with different sets of rules and so on. And we talked about those with the comments. Here's some more resources. Just search Esri Arcade. You probably get to this location. And we'll share this slide deck so you'll have excellent resources. And this is how we got to Lisa. We read one of her blogs, and this is why Lisa, we convinced her to join us. And there's great videos out there from Hussein, Supriya, Sango, and so on, and attribute rules, and a lot of help documentation. And it's a good skill to have. And I hope everybody's convinced that Arcade will be helpful for their needs. And now we're going to ask Jason, I hope you're not asleep, Jason, to run the closing poll to see how we did. And Jason, you might be on mute.
I am on mute and I was having some other technical difficulties too, but we'll launch the poll right now. And so 4 questions here. We've got, where do you see yourself using Arcade? So this is a multiple answer question. So just push which which areas that you feel you'll be using Arcade the most. Let's see. Is everyone seeing the polls, by the way?
Yes, I see it.
You see them? Okay, I just don't see any people voting. Oh, there you go.
Movement, yeah.
Now people are voting. There we go. How do you find, the question 2 is, how do you find the content on Arcade and attribute rules? Do you find today's content too easy, just right, too hard? And for those of you who might be finding it a little bit too hard, this session is obviously being recorded and will be able to be rewatched at a later time. And then you can possibly even follow along with some of these examples too. We highly recommend using out that playground to try to better familiarize yourself with Arcade. And then some questions, some pre-questions for these topic that will be after the break is, have you ever used tasks before? This is with ArcGIS Pro. And then, have you ever designed a task before? And this is also all within ArcGIS Pro. Just a little spoiler warning, tasks are all within ArcGIS Pro. So this is the new functionality in ArcGIS, and specifically within ArcGIS Pro.
So most people never used it. And from those that did, about half also designed a few, right?
Yep. So let me go ahead and end the poll there and share the results. So here, so everyone can kind of see where everyone else is at. And where you're going to be using Arcade, it looks like field calculation is the big winner here at 33%, and then it's kind of broken up between everything else. Everyone seems to find the content today about just right. And then, yes, like Amir said, 80% have never used tasks, and of that 20% that have used tasks, have you ever designed a task? No. All right.
So let's take a break now, about 15 minutes. So we should be here in 15 minutes. Use your time zone to know what time that is.
And then it's all about tasks, right?
It's all about tasks. So if you find Arcade difficult, task is much easier.
There will. Well, with tasks, we can definitely say that there will not be any code involved in the creation of tasks, not even in the slightest. You could get down into actually using code, but.
Okay, go take a break.
Yep.
We don't want to take off a break, and then we'll see you in 15 minutes. Now, Jason, I have a question for you in the meantime. Would you like to run the slides as well? So we don't have to switch, or do you like the switching?
Oh, we can switch. I'll be able to. Well, yeah. Let's do the switching. I have no idea what's going on with my laptop right now. Anyway, it's
okay. Yeah, 14 minutes to figure out.
It's not going to be able to be figured out as long as I'm just using Pro during the time. Everything should be fine.
Okay. So I'll open the other slide deck. I'll stop sharing. I'll pause sharing.
I think my goal for the next couple of weeks is to get my laptop just reformatted, just to clear everything off and then start fresh. And get a new docking station.
Yeah, I would like a docking station for sure.
I don't know, those boxes from Dell, I'm not a big fan.
No, I have not been a big fan either. And hopefully I get a new one because I've had issues with mine.
Is there something better?
I bought mine on Amazon and it's not better. I can guarantee you that.
Oh. Well, see, if I have this Yeti mic that I'm currently using right now plugged into my docking station, it turns my voice into like a Darth Vader voice, and I can't have that.
Uh, um, you should see the slide, right, Jason?
Yes.
So we're running a bit behind schedule, like 10 minutes behind.
Yeah, we're usually used to doing this task presentation in the hour time frame
Yeah.
anyway.
So we should, yeah, that's what I figured out.
So if you're passing it off to me and it takes me a second to unmute, that's my technical difficulty thing. My screen kind of goes to where I can't click anything, so I have to hit Control Alt Delete and then cancel, and then I can start clicking things again. That's the issue that I'm having with my machine. So it might take me a few
When does
seconds
it
to
happen?
unmute.
What?
I
to
don't know
unmute?
what it causes. No, it's not just that.
Oh.
It's just my screen, like nothing I can't click on anything. Like my mouse moves around, but nothing works. Like it.
So don't unmute yourself.
Well, I need to do it anyway so I can start working on working with Pro, because nothing will work there either. I have to Control Alt Delete it, but I will. I'll try to. I'll keep myself unmuted during the our presentation.
Jason will just be over on the side humming songs to himself, and singing that disco groovy song from the
Yes, I
beginning.
know.
That's awesome.
It'll be the new hold music.
Give it to Corey. Corey is a bit more dramatic though. Choice.
I'm getting all these pictures of people who are not in California of all the snow they're getting, and I'm sure many of the people on the
yeah.
call right now are inundated with cold temperatures.
I had a snow for a week and I'm done with it. The kids are fighting who's going to be on the sled every morning. And I have to walk them and drag them. I'm done with it. -17. Ouch. That's Fahrenheit too.
Where at?
Somewhere
Oh,
in Wisconsin.
in the Wisconsin. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Green Bay.
Oof.
It's probably.
I like how like there's not one spot in Minnesota that'll be higher than 0 today. And you can see I'm wearing short sleeves here because it's only 46.
$30? That's with a plus. Nice.
-22. Jeez.
Yeah, it is exceptionally bitterly cold.
That would hurt to breathe.
My mustache froze to my lip. Pretty much how cold it is.
Ouch.
You know, because it's moist, right? Right there.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
yeah. Yikes. Yeah, you cannot be outside for very long.
dangerous.
Yeah, it is. I saw somebody in shorts yesterday. I just don't understand.
And they've probably lost feeling to their legs. That's
Yeah.
why.
Exactly.
Yeah. My wife
just
said,
fell
boy,
over."
they got a nice tan. I'm like, that's not tan, that's frostbite.
Mm.
Really surprised how similar all of some of those things look to Python, and I was happy to see that, just because then you don't have to figure out everything all over again.
Yeah, and it's more forgiving, so it's easy transition.
And we need that. You know,
Yeah.
we're all tasked with doing 50 different things, so anything helpful is great.
Yeah. And more and more people are putting examples online and on GeoNet. So when you run into an issue and you don't know how to do something, it's easy to search for it and copy paste examples, or just put a question, and there's good resources out there.
So that live captioning stuff, Amir had some pretty good ones in there. The only one I took a picture of is a lot of times when you say the word arcade, it doesn't really catch it. So one of the times it said it used the word our kids. So your sentence was, and you could basically use our kids to mimic your specific and configure it to use your business needs.
Those are smart kids.
You don't want to use my kids.
And the WLIA thing has also been pretty funny. I've had it on there as WWE.
Joe, do you pronounce the WLIA? Do you try to say that word somehow or not?
Phonetically or anything?
You know, somebody in our committee says Wyla, and that drives me crazy. I just say WLIA.
Okay, because it's hard to. It's missing some vowels there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good thing we were in Germany. Then you'd
I
really
just say
have
Wisconsin Land Info, just to get away from the acronym all the
Yep.
time.
Das ist Wallo.
Spell checker, the caption didn't
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, right.
so much.
It's just brutal. I'm actually surprised it's quite accurate.
When I was at PyCon for the past couple times, all their sessions had a live captioning on the side, and I'm like, man, this live captioning is phenomenal. They're getting all the little tiny words and like you know weird words that they say or Python specific words. I'm like, so I had to ask them, what software do you guys use for this? And they said Human. They just have a stenographer on the side
Oh,
doing the typing.
My goodness, that must be the fastest person ever.
It's just a court, like a court stenographer basically doing the shorthand. She's got, they got those keyboards that only have like, 12 to 15 keys on there, and it's phonetically typing the words, and it works shockingly well.
I had once a deaf person on a training in a customer side, and he had his own sign language interpreter.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very bad for the interpreter, because imagine trying to translate the technical GIS terms. I mean, those are not GIS people, right? Yeah, that was not. That's much better with the text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that they probably let the stenographers know about certain keywords or phrases so that when they are saying these words on the stage, it actually types it out properly, because some of these like
Kogo.
Yeah, like if you were to use Kogo, yeah.
Yeah,
What does it say?
Kogo.
Oh yeah, it says Coco.
Coco before it was go-go.
Yeah, there you are. Kogo. There we go. You have to say it slowly, and then it thinks it's two individual sentences.
Geodatabase. Feature class.
Yeah.
That's easy.
Esri.
Okay, how much time
I think we're close. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because we stopped at it was at 8:40.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Looks like everybody's still on the line too. So
Yeah.
But people might take a break,
Right.
walk away.
Yep.
They got snow in Houston. Someone's saying they got snow in San Antonio. They got a little bit of snow in Houston as well yesterday.
And
Or
Dallas.
this morning.
Yeah.
Dallas. Austin, I guess they got like almost a foot.
I wonder how the U.S. houses are. Some of them, like in California, are not built for these temperatures, right? The insulation and the windows are nothing. Can get really cold for some people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd imagine in parts of Texas, it's probably pretty tricky there because they're not expecting sub-zero temperatures.
But they do have insulation for
Oh, the heat, yeah.
The heat.
for,
Yeah.
for
that's
other
true.
things.
Not the homeless people.
Yeah,
No.
crazy.
Geez, Dallas right now at 7 degrees with a real feel of -15. That's
Yeah, air
Dallas.
conditioning is what I was thinking of. The snow load on the roof is what I would worry about.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
In the UP of Michigan, they have like special roofs. They're always at a higher angle because the weight of the snow is it's incredible.
Yeah, not flat roofs like in California.
No.
Those Amazon storage units.
Yeah. People in the chat, it's like great points. There's very few snow plows, and then the rolling blackouts. Yeah, I read that this morning in Dallas.
People are probably out on their driveways using salt shakers to salt them.
Boo, Jace. Okay, let's go to the tasks. Let's start.
Go with tasks.
I think so.
Get you guys out.
Okay. Jason, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so hope everybody had a quick break. And different subjects, ArcGIS Pro Tasks. This is an introduction. And we're going to start by playing a role in which I'm going to be the customer and Jason is going to be an Esri technical support person. So, hello, Jason.
Hello. It's almost like we're having a video chat right now, like a real tech support call.
Yeah, it is. I have a problem in my organization, and I hoped you might be able to help me.
Sure. I mean, that's what we're here for. Always good to help.
Okay, it drives me nuts that every person in our organization does things differently.
Yeah, I can understand that there's not a lot of best practice. You don't have a lot of like detailed documentation of what you need to do, what you need to teach every person to do.
Yeah, I know the best practice, but yeah, it's hard to transfer it to everybody. The other problem we have, I'm sorry, I'm a bit kind of whining, but people are human beings. They make mistakes. And
yeah, you want to make sure you have quality insurance because, when there's a lot of mistakes happening, this could cost you, there could be a lot of downstream problems, of course, with this.
Yeah, we do see those downstream effects. The other thing, problem with mistakes, that they are usually very expensive.
Yeah, because if you can catch the errors before they happen, you can save yourself a lot of money in that sense.
Yeah, always smart hindsight. The other problem we have is we have other departments sometimes complain that our updates take too long.
So you're probably wanting something to have like good metrics that you can understand, like which tasks take long time, which processes will be shorter than others.
Right. It's also, you have different users, different users take different times. It's not easy to have metrics out of all of that. And then when you get a new employee, training them takes a very long time until they become productive.
Yeah, so when you get new people, you want to be able to transfer your knowledge quickly. You want them to be able to learn the software. And as we've seen today, there's a lot of people using ArcGIS Pro. So we want to get people familiarized with Pro as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And you know, our organization is special. It's not like any probably organization you talk on the phone with.
No, you guys are especially unique. I've never seen anything like you guys.
Yeah, we are special, and you know, technology moves so fast. I remember the first GIS course in ArcInfo, those good old days.
I still don't even know what that is.
Okay, well, you missed out. So I'm sorry about this whining, but here's a workflow. This is the reason actually I called you guys about that we're having trouble with. The workflow goes as follows. You locate your work area, and you can do it using an address or a subdivision name. Then all you have to do is select the subdivision, take the name, write it on a piece of paper somewhere, and then create new buildings in this subdivision. It could be one building, usually it's many buildings, and then you need to attribute them. One important attribute we have is that you want to have the subdivision name in those attributes, and sometimes our users forget to save their edits.
All right, so that seems like a pretty easy workflow. We can, I'll show you a cool way to do that using tasks. So let me go ahead and share my screen. You'll need to stop sharing yours. Oh wait, I can actually force you to stop.
It.
Yeah, I know.
Force
I'm
it.
tech support. I can force you to do that. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right, so you should be seeing Pro right now.
I do.
All right, let me move this thing off to another screen. All right, so here in Pro, we've got some data here with some building footprints, and this is kind of what your workflow. This is your data that you wanted me to address this workflow with. So I've gone ahead and created a task to accomplish that. So to access tasks, I'm going to go to the View tab, and I'm going to click on Tasks. This will open up the task pane. So I've created a task that follows those steps in your workflow. And the great thing about tasks is that you can stay completely within this pane and your map view. So what that means is I can dock my table of contents on the right, I can dock my catalog on the catalog on the right, contents on the left, and I can even minimize my ribbon. So I have full map view real estate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this first one, create buildings workflow. So this is the task that I created to accomplish that workflow. I'm going to double click on that. So the first step you said was to locate your work area. So you can see using the locate pane, find the address of your work area. So this example is going to take place in the Oak Leaf subdivision. So I'm going to go ahead and click, type that in and click enter, and you can see there's a subdivision called Oak Leaf, and it zoomed me right to it right away. So now I could also have skipped this if I happen to be in my current location. So once my work area is found, click next step to continue. So now it wants me to select a subdivision. Using the select tool, select a subdivision that will contain the building footprints to be created. All right, so using the select tool, as you notice, the select tool has now already been activated for me. Now I have all these other buildings and address points and lines in here. Now I'm worried of what if I select those? But you can see the task itself is also preventing me from selecting those. I can select only subdivisions in this case and no other features. So I'm going to click next step. Now it's asking me to create the buildings. It's also toggled on a world imagery layer so I can better see where these building locations are going to be placed. Now, I'm no cartographer, so I'm going to do my best to create these buildings.
I'm not going to hire you with this.
No, that's fine.
No. Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to create a couple right now, just in the interest of time. And I'm going to go ahead and click next step. Now I need to attribute these buildings. As you can see, it also flipped off the world imagery layer. Now I can go ahead, and you also mentioned that you needed to populate these buildings with the subdivision name so that each of these buildings knew which subdivision it was being constructed in. And if you look here in the subdivision name field, the subdivision name has already been pre-populated into that attribute. This has all been done with a certain action within tasks that I can show you later. So I'm going to go ahead and click finish. And at this point, it's going to prompt me to save my edits, which at this case, since this is a demo, I'm going to say no.
Very cool. And how many lines of code did you need to do to use here?
There is no lines of code needed for this at all.
Impressive. So let me share my screen now. And thank you, Jason. So let's go over what we saw here. So what is a task? Just so we are on the same page, it's a task is designed to be configured for a sequential repeatable steps, for a repeatable workflow. So not something that you do ad hoc, something that you are familiar, that is supposed to be done again and again in the same manner. The purpose of task is to guide users and share knowledge. They are meant to be interactive. It's not something for automation like a geoprocessing model. They do improve efficiency. You saw how Jason did not need to change selectability, change tools, everything, that he had the right tool, the right time, with the right environment, with the right layers. And they also have the ability to improve the quality of the product that you're producing. Unlike the commands, which might be called select by a rectangle, they use your business language. So the step was called select the subdivision. And they are fully configurable. There was no line of code in what Jason showed you. So when you design a task, and before you start, of course, we expect the task designer to know the workflow itself and know that it's repeatable. And if those are met, you also need to understand where the project resources can be maps, layers, geoprocessing tools, even add-ins. And you also need to know the users. What are their roles? What is their license level? You don't want to use a command that is available in license level that they don't have access to. You don't want to use an extension that they don't have access to, and so forth. Do they have to have permissions potentially to the data you're working with and to the network environment resource that you might be working with? So that's just kind of a checklist before you start. And to create a task, we use something called Task Designer. And they are created in the ArcGIS project itself, in the APRX. They are stored like maps as part of the project definition. They are a task, we call those task items. And you can have many of those, like you can have many maps and many layouts in a project. Before you start creating a task, I would recommend, of course, running the workflow outside of task to make sure it is available. There's no magic. If you cannot run a sequence of steps outside of tasks, there's no reason to believe you could run it within a task. There's no magic sauce in there. It's just calling existing functionality. They are configured using something called Task Designer that Jason will show you soon, that allows you to create a new task item, create new tasks, many, group them together if you wanted to, and then add steps within each one, and also add, of course, the metadata, kind of the description, the instructions, even links to helpful resources. When you create a step within a task, a step was to locate the work area. A step was select the subdivision. There's general information you can input there for the step itself, the instructions. You can say if the step behavior this will make sense soon. You can add actions. Those could be commands. Those could be running a GP tool or getting attributes. It could have no command at all. It could just say, make sure you scan and save it in the document management system. So it could be even procedural. It can manage the selection for you. It can copy, calculate attributes. It can perform some level of verification before proceeding to the next step. It can control the map views, which maps are open, which one is the active view. It can link the views together. It can control the snapping environment. And it can also control which layers are turned on. All the properties on the layers, basically almost all of them, can be controlled and configured. So when you get to a specific step, it's ready to go with the proper environment settings. Step behavior that you'll see soon by Jason has a few step behaviors. One is called manual, where the user is kicking off the step and also telling the system when the step is done. That's the default because it's hard to guess for each command what's the most appropriate behavior. Most steps will, however, be auto run or auto proceed, which is a one mouse click. Example, we can kick off the select tool, but we're waiting for the user to tell us when they're done with selecting the features. This type is example of auto run because the user steps to proceed. Another step could be auto proceed. For example, a geoprocessing tool where you put the inputs and and then you tell it when to proceed. Sorry, the other way. And then automatic, you don't need any intervention from the user, and we'll see that as well. That might make more sense after you see the design phase, but in a life cycle of a step, certain actions happen in different times. And you'll probably see this also in the help doc that it's fully documented. The first thing we do when we enter the step is setting the maps and the layers properly. And then there could be potentially a set of actions like selection and verification actions. And that's all before we run the main command or GP tool in the step itself. And then potentially when we are exiting, we can also do certain things to make sure we get the right outputs or there's the right selection. So tying this to behavior, automatic, everything executes in one go. Auto run waits for the user to click next step. Auto proceeds waits for the user to press run and then proceeds like a geoprocessing tool. And manual, as the user clicks twice, wants to run the step, then the command runs, and then they click next step. That's good if you run something multiple times, like select something and run, select something and run. And of course, skip, like the locate pane, you can skip altogether because you're already in the right place. So with that, we'll turn to Jason to see how you can create one of those.
All right. So we're back here in Pro, and we're going to recreate that exact task that I just showed you in creating buildings. We're going to create it from scratch. So one more time, I'm just going to go ahead and show where tasks are located in the task pane. That was from the View tab. Another way to create new tasks is if you go to Insert, you'll see Insert Task. You can insert a new task item or import or browse to other task items, which we'll show a little bit later as well. Now, the terminology that I'm going to be using right now, a task item is the overall encompassing task item that's part of Pro that has multiple tasks. If I go to the catalog pane and open this up, let me go ahead and pin it. You'll see I have this task item called the Create Building Tasks. That's this task item that has multiple tasks within it. If I were to create another new task item, it would add another one to here that I could create multiple tasks within that as well. But we're just going to be working with this task item, and we're going to be creating a task within it. So as Amir said, if you go to the menu button on the top right and say Edit in Designer, this will open up the Designer pane. This is contextually based on whatever I'm selecting in the task pane. So whenever I choose another task, you can see this contextually changes to what I can edit. So let's go to, and you'll also notice that the task pane, a new toolbar appears at the top. These contains all the tools needed to creating new tasks, new steps, deleting steps, and then also recording as well. So right now I want to create a new task. I'm going to create it just within this group here, and you can see a new task has been created. On the right, I can go ahead and update the name of this task. I'll just call this Create Buildings Demo. So now you can see as I typed in the text on the right and hit enter, it updated on the left. So what's on the left is what the user is going to be seeing when they're executing the task. I could also give it a description. I can say this is a demo. And you'll see on the bottom, that's what is displayed as the description of the task. So depending on which task you click, descriptions will be presented to the user explaining what the task does. Now let me go ahead and double click on this task. You'll see there are no steps currently. I could click this record button and then move the task pane and the task designer out of the way and go through in my entire workflow, and it'll record every click that I do in the map when I'm clicking an actual tool in the ribbon or a geoprocessing tool in the GP pane. But right now I'm going to actually configure this task by just creating the steps manually and going through and editing the actions. I still will do some recording in here so you can see how that's done. So if you recall, the first step in this task was to locate the work area. So I'm going to say locate work area. Now you can see it updates the name on both sides. I can even give it a tooltip. I can say this will locate your work area. And the tooltip, when the user hovers over it, they'll see that tooltip. Now instructions, this is a area where you can type as much text as you want, and this appears right below this black line. So I can say below is the locate pane, search for a subdivision name. Now you can see that text appears here. And then the run and proceed instructions, this is a limited amount of text. We only allow for 150 characters, and that's because it's going to go below this black bar, and we do not want a lot of characters here because this will push this black bar up, concealing whatever might be presented within the task pane. So here I'm going to just say, once you are in your work area, click next step to continue. So at this point, now we can start configuring the behaviors, but let's go ahead and go to the actions tab, and let's go ahead and set up the action for this one. So this is where the locate pane was presented to the user within the task pane. Now this in the actions tab is where we set the action for this step. We'll jump back to behaviors and go over that a little bit more in a minute, but let's just focus on this. So what I could do is I could double click on this and go to the commands and search for locate this way by using the command search tool. But what's even easier is I can use this one-click recorder. This recorder here will just record one single item, and then the recorder will turn off. This recorder over here is always on until you click stop recording. This one, I can just go up to the map tab and click on locate.
This one is also your favorite, right, Jason?
This one's my favorite because I like creating the task this way. I like creating each step and micromanaging each step and doing all this stuff one by one. So as you can see, I clicked on the locate pane, and actually it opened up because I actually clicked the tool. So that's what the thing is. When I use this recorder and I click on a tool up here, it will actually activate that tool, but it'll also record it. It actually opened up the pane over my task designer, which also is another good point, is to unbuddy the task designer and the tasks pane from the side, because a lot of times when you're clicking on tools, they will open up in the areas on the right and on the left, and it might cover up your task pane and you might get confused on where it has gone. So as you can see, once I've recorded, the locate pane has been recorded as the action for this step. If I double click on this, you can see some more additional properties of the locate pane. Many tools in ArcGIS Pro can be embedded. If they cannot be embedded, this will be disabled and it will be unchecked, meaning the tool will still run, but when you get to that step, it'll actually open up outside of tasks. So there are still some tools that cannot be embedded, but all geoprocessing tools and many of the editing tools can be embedded within tasks. When they are embedded within tasks, you have some access to some preset parameters. So like in this example, I don't want the user to be using the XY provider, locate provider. I want them only to be using this custom layer of subdivisions when they're doing the search here. So when I searched for oak leaf during my demo, it searched through just my subdivision layers to try to find any name that might be associated to oak leaf. I could also type in a search parameter. So if, let's say, all my subdivisions started with S dash, I could just type S dash in here, and that'll always be presented to the user on the left-hand side of the screen. So I'm going to click done. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my views control here. And I want to make sure that this address and buildings map is the one that is open and is active. The other maps, they are not going to be active, and I don't care if they're open or closed. So I'm going to leave those as dashes. But in the contents pane, I want to make sure for this step, I want to explicitly make sure that the subdivisions layer is on and everything else can remain as is. So here in each step, you can control which view is active and in that view, which of the layers are on, selectable, editable, snappable, whether or not the labels are on as well. So you can control this on a step-by-step basis. It's also recommended that you don't go through and change all these to either on or off for everything, because that means that each step it's having to run these commands every time to see if the layer is on or off, or toggle them on or off explicitly. You just want to make sure that the ones that you want on for the user during the step are on, or if you want them off, then turn them off for the user. So we've made it that subdivisions are on. We also want them to be selectable because we're going to be selecting them a little bit later. And then we will go ahead and go back and create another new step. So this next step was, if you recall, we needed to select subdivision. Or select subdivision. I can give it a tooltip or instructions and run and proceed, but we'll just go ahead and skip that for now. And we'll go ahead and go back to the Actions tab and let's record the rectangle tool. So this will activate the rectangle tool. Now in this step, let's jump back to the step behaviors. If we look back at step 1, we'll notice the step behavior has been automatically set to auto run and it cannot be changed to anything else. This is because if we embed the locate pane, the only behavior that is accessible for that is to auto run, meaning it's going to present the pane and it'll wait for the user to click next step. Since the locate pane in the first step was an optional thing, we could also click this and say this one's going to be an optional step, so that provides the skip button for the user. But in the second step, when we activate that select by rectangle tool, we want to also make sure that it's auto run. So we want, when this step begins, we want that select tool to be active and ready for the user to use, and we want to wait for them to proceed to the next step. Now, if I go to Actions, the rectangle tool has been set, but if you recall, when I got to step 4, when I was attributing those building footprints, the subdivision name was already pre-populated. The way that we did that was in this step, when the user selected the subdivision, we copied the name of that subdivision into memory and then used it later. To do that, when we exit the step, meaning when the user has a subdivision selected, we want to copy the attribute. So when we go into this action, we're going to copy attributes when exiting the step. Where are we going to copy the attributes from? We're going to copy the attributes in the feature or record currently selected. What table is this attribute in? It's in the subdivision table. Which attribute from that feature or record currently selected that we want to copy? We want to copy the name. And let's go ahead and give this a variable a name. We'll call it my sub name. And we're going to click add. So we're copying the name variable from that subdivision into a variable called my sub name. When we exit the step, we're going to go to the Views tab, just verify everything is set here. We're going to go to the Contents. You can see when you create a new step, it automatically populates it with whatever the previous step's contents were set as. So in this case, once again, we want to make sure that the subdivisions are selectable and visible. All right, and with that done, we're going to go to the next step. And in this step, this was the create feature step. So we're going to call this create building footprints. Oops. P-R-I-N-T-S. There we go. There's also spell check in here too, so that's nice too. So if I were to mistype something, you could always right click and get the spell check on those words, which is very handy for someone like me. All right, so this step required us to create building footprints. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the record button again, click on the edit tab, and then click create. And this has recorded the create features pane. And as you can see on the left, it's also embeddable. So it's been embedded within the task pane, but you'll notice there's a bunch of other layers. In this step, we want to only create the building footprints. So let's go ahead and double click on this again, and we can see it's embedded, and we have some preset parameters here. In this case, I can filter the layer to whichever layer I want it to just show. So I want it to just show the building footprint. I don't have to type too much to filter it, so I can just type build. So that means the user is only going to see this layer within the task pane when they get to this step. I'm going to click done. Let's go back to the view control. Everything's still set up here. But now in contents, during this step, I want to make sure that the user can see that aerial imagery. So I'm going to toggle the aerial imagery on so that they can see the buildings that they need to create. Also, I want to make sure that they can see the layer they are going to be creating in. So I want to make sure the building footprints are visible, and I want to make sure that they're selectable, and I want to make sure that they're editable. So everything right here is set. I could even just toggle off the, I can toggle this back to a dash. It's not really explicit right now that they need to be able to select subdivisions. So I'm just going to toggle this back to a dash. Just to clarify one more time what these three symbols mean, you can hover over and see the tooltips here. If it's a check mark, means it's on. We're going to force it to be on. If it's an X, it's going to force that it's going to turn off the layer. And if it's a dash, it just means if it's on, leave it on. If it's off, leave it off. All right, so that is create building footprints. Now let's create one more step here. And this one is going to be the attribute step. So we're going to call this attribute buildings. And we're going to go back to the actions tab and we're going to record the attributes. Now in this case, now we need to calculate that field on all the buildings that we created and populate it with that variable that we have our name of our subdivision stored in. So when starting the step, so basically as the step begins, before it even runs the attribute pane, we want to calculate a field. We want to calculate a field when starting the step. What selection do we want to do? We don't want to do features or records currently selected because, you know, when you're creating features, only the last feature you create is selected. We want to select all the features or records that were created within the task. Which table do we want those, which table are those features in? In this case, it's the building footprint. What field do we want to calculate? We want to calculate the subdivision name. All right, this looks a lot like the calculate field window, which it basically is. But there's one new thing. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll see your variables that you've created. If you have a whole bunch of fields, you could even just quickly filter to show only the task variables. So there's the my sub name. So I want subdiv name, which is the name of the actual field name of subdivision name. I want it to equal my sub name. So I'm going to click done. So once again, as the step begins, I'm going to calculate subdiv name in building footprint, and I'm going to set it equal to that variable that I had set. Let's go back to views and contents. Let's toggle off the world imagery layer here. We want to actually explicitly turn it off during the attributing phase. And I want to make sure that these are still all set properly. Everything's looking good there. And let's just jump back to general. We can see that once again, the attribute step has explicitly set my step behavior. Same thing with the previous step in create building footprints that also set my step behavior. And we've got one more step to create. And this one is going to be called the save edits. And this one, I'm going to click on actions again. I'm going to go up and go ahead and click on save edits. Just going to say no to the dialog though, but it recorded it. But with this step, since it always prompts the user with that, do you want to save edits, yes or no? We could actually make this step automatic and hidden. So it's automatically going to run the save edits command. It'll still prompt the user because that's just explicitly how that tool is run. And we also want to make it hidden. So when the user sees all the steps, they just don't need to really see this step. They just know at the end of their task, they're just going to be asked if they need to save edits or not. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and close Designer. And let's just quickly run this to see if it works properly. We've got the locate pane. I can just pan somewhere else real quick. Just type in oak leaf. Does it work? Still does the right thing there. Next step. I want to select the subdivision. Looks like it's the only thing that's being able to be selectable. Oop, it looks like my buildings are selectable. This is always a great way to just go back into Designer. I can go straight in at this step. I'm going to end the task, go back to my contents pane, and I realized I made subdivision selectable, but everything else was dashes. This is a mistake on my part, but I could quickly rectify this by right-clicking on this and saying only make this layer selectable. So what this does is it turns off every other layer just in this step and says these layers are not selectable, only subdivisions. So let me close and let's just run it again. Locate work area, I'm already in it, so let's skip. Select subdivision. There we go. Now nothing else is selectable. And I'm going to click next step. World imagery layer turns on. I go in here, I can create my building footprints. I'm going to create one more. And then I'm going to click next step. And this time I only created one building, so there should only be one selected. These other ones are created previously. It's been populated with the right results, and I can click finish. And then it's going to ask me to save my edits, and I'm going to say no. So there we go. That was how you create a task from scratch. And I will give it back to you, Amir.
Thank you, Jason. So I hope, Jason, is this a technical support phone call recorded for quality purposes or not?
It's this whole session has been recorded, so yeah, you can go back and create this task all by yourself and follow along with all those steps.
If it was not recorded, I might have offered you a job, but I won't do that now. So I just wanted to tell you, back in my customer shoes, that the workflow I told you before is actually the simplified version, because the real life has a few more steps that the editor needs to do, which I'll explain to you, because sometimes there are steps where the users forget to update certain attributes, or they add incorrect attributes, and that could be they type something wrong, or they select the wrong features or the wrong number of features. They might forget which features they already created in the work order, and they also need to write down when they start the job and when they finish it, so we can report that time and charge other departments with, right? And they might take a coffee break or write emails, and they forget those things. So this is how the real workflow looks like. You get a work order ID, you have to write down when you start, you do the step that you showed, but after you create those new buildings, we want you also to validate your edits to make sure they are good. If there's any errors, you need to fix them. And fixing the errors, I want to tell you, sometimes you need more than one tool, right? Sometimes you need to move something you missed creating something. So it's not as easy as a task where you only have one step at a time. You might need multiple tools. That's what I'm saying. And then you want to validate if you think you fixed it. Great. If not, you have to iterate here a bit. And only then, when you're done with the geometry, you can add your attributes. And then you maybe want to review again, save your edits, and then record the time again. And this is actually the real workflow. So now I'm going to challenge you if you can show me how this is done.
Sure. So for those keen eye observers, they would have also seen this advanced group here. It says create buildings advanced. I've had a little bit of precognition, and I was able to determine all those steps that you probably were going to do. So we're going to show you how a task looks with all those additional steps within it. So I'm going to double click on create buildings advanced. And like you said, the first step was to create a work order ID. So in this case, you get a work order ID from some sort of legal document, and you type it into this box here, and you click next step. So now it's copying that work order ID, and it's going to be using it in a variable at a later date. Once again, searching for my work area. In this case, I'm already in it, so I'm going to click skip. We need to select my subdivision. We can see the subdivision here has already been selected. And let's say I select 2 subdivisions in this case, or 3 subdivisions in this case. Now I'm going to click next step. Now we've also verified how many features are selected. We can customize the error message in here saying, please only select 1 subdivision. So, all right, so let's only select 1 subdivision. Press next step. Now we're going to go ahead and create the buildings again. This step is basically the same. So I'm going to use my amazing cartography skills to create the rest of these buildings that are missing in this subdivision. And voila. And we're going to go ahead and click next step. And we can see we've got errors outside, but my work area here in the oak leaf subdivision is all I'm really worried about. So in this case, I'm validating the topology. We can see it says building must contain an address point, and address point must be contained within a building. So we got a couple different errors here. So we've got a tool palette here, which allows us to use different tools within a single step. So for example, this thing right here, this address point needs to be on top of this building. So let's go and click on the move tool, and let's change my selection and select this address point. And let's just move it on top of this building and click finish sketch. Now I can go back and click on validate again, and we'll see this one has been validated and the error has been removed. So it looks like this address point is just slightly off. So I'm going to go ahead and change the selection again here. Select this address point, move it on to there, click finish. Did I move it? I must have not moved it. Let me try that one more time. All right.
You can move the building.
We can move the building. There we go. Oh no, both are selected. Change the selection. We just want the one selected. There we go. Now it's moving properly. And then this one over here says building must contain an address point. There happens to be no address point here. So let's go over to the create features here. And in this case, I'm going to create an address point right on top of that building. And I'm going to click finish sketch. And let's go ahead and validate one more time and verify that our topology looks accurate. The errors are gone. There's a little bit of a refresh issue here, which is still showing the error messages, but there they go. And then let's go ahead and click next step. Now in this attribute step, it's going to select all the features that we created during the task, and that and it's going to, you can see it's going to populate. In this case, you're going to only see the 4 building footprints because the other 3 that I created up here was in a previous task. So normally I would have gone through this advanced one, created all of them in one go. But you can see the 4 buildings that I did create, this one, this one, this one, and this one have all been selected here. And the address point that I even created is also selected. Now, if you recall at the very beginning, I typed in that work order ID number. That has now been populated here along with the subdivision name. Same thing with the address point. The work order ID has been populated on this address point because that address point was created during this during this task. So I'm going to go ahead and click finish, and it looks like I'm getting another error here. Please assign the number of stories. So now it's checking to say, like, at this step, these buildings I created need to have, we need to have the number of stories populated before we can finish this workflow. So I can go ahead and select all the buildings like this, and these are all 2-story buildings. So I'm just going to go.
Try to do it only on 2.
Sure. I'll just select 2 buildings, and I'm going to say 2 stories and hit enter. And then I'm going to click finish. Still getting the error here. So let's see which other ones we might have to do. So these other 2 buildings here also don't have floors represented. So I'm going to go ahead and click finish now. And now that we're successfully entered the number of stories, it allowed us to proceed. And it's going to ask save edits. Save all my edits. I'm going to say no. And so now that has completed the task. Now you also wanted to see, like, how long do these tasks take for the users? So if I open up the contents pane,
the metrics,
pin it, we can see the metrics exactly of how long this task took. We have a task history table. Briefly, real quick, to show how this is created and where it is stored. If we go to the project backstage and into options, you'll see the ability to create a task history table in the project tasks options. So you can enable tasks history. The table will be created in a geodatabase. This can be a file geodatabase, or it can be a geodatabase that is on SDE on a server somewhere, and it'll create this table. And then in this table, if we back out, we can right click on it and say open. I'm going to go ahead and close the task pane right now. And in this table, you'll see a lot of different metrics. You'll see the user ID of the person who ran the task, myself. You can see the project name, so which project was the task was being run in. The task name, so you can see create buildings task was run by myself. And this is the task item name. So this is the entire task item itself, which version the item was created in. The task name, so you can see I ran create buildings. I ran the create buildings demo this time. I actually didn't run it completely this time because I had made that mistake. So the task completed was set to 0. Then I ran it again, and it was correctly, oh, what happened there? That's weird. Hold on. There goes my laptop doing things again. Come on, let's move this back up again. it was completely run this time, and then the advanced one was also run. You can also see the duration in seconds and how long it took. So the reason we have this duration here is it's great for when you modify your task or you create new tasks or new steps within a task or remove steps within a task, it might increase efficiency of how that task is run. So if you create a new step and all of a sudden you see these durations skyrocket, maybe you made something less efficient and you maybe need to go and re-examine that task to see if something might be wrong with it.
Jason, but if you create building footprints and you take a coffee break or write an email or go to the bathroom, what about the time then?
Yes, that's a good question. So anytime that the mouse is idle for more than, I think it's 8 seconds or 5 or somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds, somewhere between that, the mouse is not moving during this time, the task timer is not going. This also accounts for running geoprocessing tools, because you might have a geoprocessing tool that might run for maybe 5 minutes. We don't want those 5 minutes to be counted during the task. So in this case, the timer is then shut down during that time, during the processing of those tools. It's only the time taken in actually running the task and moving the mouse. So I think this accounts for all those different additions to your workflow.
Okay.
And I will pass it back.
Thanks, Jason. And if there's any questions, guys, don't be shy. Just start typing them in, and we'll start taking them soon. And let's go over what. So Jason just showed the task history. If you switch to Outlook, for example, to another app while you're doing your task, that's another trigger to stop counting. And like Jason said, idle time is filtered out. And then maybe in the end of the year, you can have the average time it takes to enter a subdivision, which is the standard deviations, etc. You can see we also use it when we give our own testers in Esri to test our tasks. We also can monitor them because we're using an SDE for that. And you can have one task history table for multiple task items coming from multiple projects. That's no problem. And if you combine it with charts, you can get a lot of insights. So there was the task history that we just show. Sharing tasks is like sharing knowledge, right? Or the best way to share a task is to share it as the part of the project package, because tasks use the maps, the layers, the tools. So when you package it all together, it works well. However, if you had your own secret sauce of creating building footprints and you wanted to share that with another organization that doesn't have access to your project, you can still do that. You can publish and share your task item on ArcGIS Online or the organizational account on its own. You can save it to a file and send it by email directly. And then, of course, the receiver will have to map it to their own maps, to their own layers, to their own tools. And if we have time, Jason will also show that to us with partial tasks that we ship. And you can also, when you design tasks, if you have 3 steps that repeat in every task, you can just copy paste them between the tasks. So that's another way to increase efficiency. We also need to know and acknowledge when you don't want to use a task. I wouldn't use a task for something that takes 3 days, right? We want it to keep interactive, something that takes, I don't know, a few minutes, half an hour, depending on what you do. But it kind of become meaningless if it takes very long durations. If your project is not stable enough, you're still working on the maps, the layers, the tools, wait a bit until it stabilizes before you start hooking them up, because then you'll have to go back and set certain layers as visible or not, and so on. Please keep in mind that it's not a micromanagement tool. We don't lock you from using any other tool when you use a task. So it's not designed to lock users down. On the contrary, it's designed to empower them, to make them more efficient. And if you want to use the measure tool while you digitize buildings, you are welcome to do that.
If the task like forces something off or selectability off, you can still go back on and turn that selectability back on again.
Yep. So it's not locked down. And people like some geoprocessing gurus, they like tasks because kind of for the wrong reasons, because they can call commands and GP tools in the same place. It's kind of a superpowered GP model, but that's not the intention. Geoprocessing is used for automation, and tasks are meant to be interactive, and that's how you should think about those things. We wouldn't expect to see a task with 100 steps calling commands and GP tools together that runs automatically every night. Tips and tricks. If we were showing it in the live to you, we can. I would challenge Jason to use one hand when he does it, and you will see that he uses the shortcuts to skip, execute, to run, or to continue, and those are the shortcuts. Other tips and tricks includes many times you see the task fail, and it's not because the task is failing; it's because the context for the task usually fails. So, for example, if the task has to do select by rectangle and the maps are closed, it will show this error. So when you see a step fail, make sure that the context for that command in that step is available. If you cannot, if the select is disabled, that means that, of course, like here, that step would not be possible to run. And you have, as a task designer, the responsibility to make sure that the context is correct, meaning that map is open and there's features in the map. So that's another tip. Like Jason showed you, close the panes, you have maximum real estate, don't buddy up and dock the task pane with other panes, because then they fight each other. So embedding paint is really powerful and cleans the UI. Use that instead, that's better. We talked about that. And then because users can change the selectability, they can close maps, they have the freedom to do those things. A good task would kind of have defense against that. So don't assume that the selection that was created in step number 1 is still available in step number 5. Instead, save that selection in step number 1 and then call that selection again back in step number 5 if you want to use it. Other things, this is put them side by side. You'll see it better. It's harder when they are on 2 opposite sides or on 2 screens. That's hard to see. Recording is easier, especially if you use commands like delete. If you search for the command delete, you'll see that there's probably 20 different deletes of things in Pro. So when you record it, you know that you actually got the right command that you intend to. There's a quick button here that says current view. So if you want to always start with a certain layout of visibility and so on, you can just press that and it will set you for success. But like Jason said, it means extra hard work if you have many layers, because we're going to go layer by layer and make sure that those settings are set properly. Optional, you can skip, copy paste between tasks, between steps. You can copy paste the task and then modify it as well. We don't support if-then logic branching. It's not a geoprocessing model. So if you need to have 5 steps and then the user makes a decision and then they run another different task based on their decision, it's fine because it's interactive. Summary, share knowledge, define best practices and workflows. It reduces confusion. We have a lot of consultants that like it. Instead of writing those big, heavy manuals, they share a task with the users. If there's a best practice to maintain land in Wisconsin, you can write your Wisconsin land information best practice task and share it among other organizations. It guides new users to be proficient and efficient from the first day on the job, even if they don't know Pro, because it takes them step by steps and gives them the right tool in the right time. But for those experienced users, it increases their efficiency because they don't have to do the extra clicks to set the map, the layers, and look for the tool on the right ribbon tab and so on. Use business like we said, and you can share it in a variety of ways. If you want to learn more about tasks, the first place to go would be the help documentation in ArcGIS Pro. This is where we want to keep it. In the UC, there's a recorded session called Tips and Tricks. So once you get going, we recommend that you see that. There's also a short training on ArcGIS Pro Tasks, and there's even a business partner that wrote a book about that. And it's also part of the Getting to Know ArcGIS Pro. And this session, as well as others, are also recorded online. I think, Jason, if it's okay with you, before handing it off to questions, if you can see the built-in task that we ship with ArcGIS Pro.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and share again. All right, so here we have another project that I have a parcel fabric in, and this happens to be the Sheboygan parcel fabric. So in this case, I want to utilize some pre-installed tasks that have been shipped with the software. To find those tasks, just go to the Insert tab, click on Task, say Import and Open Task File, and then you're going to browse. You're going to go to the Parcel Fabric group. You could also go to Browse. So this is where if someone emails you a task item or task file, you can open it that way. But I'm going to go to Parcel Fabric. Here opens up this little dialog here, and I want to load up my record-driven workflows. So this is going to load. You can see the task folder just appeared here, and my task pane opened up on my other monitor. So here's the task pane, and with the tasks that were created and shipped with ArcGIS Pro. You'll notice there's some messages here. So these tasks are assigned to specific layers, meaning they're going to work against a specific layer. There's a specific polygon layer, parcel polygon layer, and a parcel line layer that these tasks work against. So right now they're currently broken because when the task was created, they were created with some other layers. So you can see there's a bunch of errors here. I can click on the first one and just say, show me. This opens up the task designer page, once again on another window. And it says, these are the broken resources. So the first one, the overarching broken resources, that I have a map that's broken. It was using a map called Parcel Editing Map. I don't have that map, but I have this one, Sheboygan Parcel Fabric. So I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to say, this is the map that I'm wanting to use, Sheboygan Parcel Fabric. Okay, from that map, there are two layers that are also now broken, a parcel and a parcel line layer. So in this case, based on my layers here, I want to use the tax parcel, and then for the lines, I want to use tax lines. So now that those have all been, all the broken resources have been remapped, I can go ahead and just give this task, one of these tasks, a quick run through. So let's go ahead and say it's merge parcels. I'm going to double click on it and it says create a parcel record. So first step, I need to create a record. I'll just go ahead and give this a name. What type of record is it? It's going to be a merge. And this is all data specific. This record type is tied to a domain on this data. We're going to say today's date, and we're going to say create record. So you can see the record's being created up here in the top. Locate my work area. In this case, I'm already here. So I'm going to click skip. And now it's going to say select my parent parcels. So in this case, I want to select the tax parcels, and I'm going to click next step. And we can see I've got my two tax parcels selected. I'm going to go ahead and give it a new parcel ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And we're going to go ahead and click finish. So it's merged those two tax parcels together. You can see the new name has been presented there, and I've clicked finish to go ahead and move on and be done with that workflow. So you can see it all works right now. And if like merge is not the term that we use here, I can easily right click on this saying edit in designer, and I can go and customize this to be combined parcels. If that's the term that we use, I can edit the description. And if there's other steps in here that we need to do, I can go through and update and add more steps, remove steps, change terms. But this is a great template, a great way to get started and start working with tasks with some already predefined workflows. And that's it.
I prepared you, Jason, to ask you a bunch of questions, but you answered all of them. So I'm stoked now.
Sweet. So now we can have everyone else ask us a bunch of questions.
Yes, and if not, we'll go to the polls, or we can do both in the same time.
Yeah, let's actually go to the polls real quick. I'll go ahead and launch that. So let me launch it. So after, do you see yourself designing tasks? Is this something that you guys are interested in now that you've seen it? And then the second question is, do you find tasks useful for your organization? Okay. So the numbers right now are coming in that a lot of people are probably going to be using tasks.
And this does not surprise us because Task was one of the most popular UC technical session last year.
Yeah. Ooh, there you go. Now everyone can see the results too. All right, live results. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and then share the results with everybody as well. So yeah, 88% say yes, they see themselves using tasks, and do they find it useful? 93% say absolutely. So.
And because we also learned about Arcade today and attribute rules, so the population of the subdivision that we did through tasks could have been achieved also using, of course, attribute rules. This capability was introduced many years before attribute rules was introduced. So now there's more than one way to perform that. And another thing that might be coming in the future, road ahead for task, is the ability to use Arcade to evaluate a step. So basically prevent you from proceeding until an Arcade expression has been evaluated using an Arcade language, which will give us the power of Arcade within tasks. So now if there's any questions, feel free, guys, on any of the topics.
This is Lori. I know somebody had asked earlier if there would be some PDFs aside just from the, obviously this is being recorded, but did you have any PDFs that you could share?
We can share both slide decks as PDFs plus links to the sample data for the Arcade, so people can do it on their, follow the examples that we showed here and repeat that. Specifically for the parcel oriented people, there's the Parcel Fabric meetup, where we did 2 sessions on Arcade, more in depth. We did an introduction one, and then we did a more advanced one. So for those who want to see more advanced examples of how to use Arcade, we could also include those links.
Yeah, I'll post a couple links, the Land Records Meetup and our Parcel Fabric GeoNet page into the chat right now. The Land Records Meetup is the meetup site where you can register and get info of our meetups past and future. And then the GeoNet page is a great place for joining the Parcel Fabric community and asking questions, and then also seeing all the videos of our past meetups are all located there, so you can rewatch them. And any future meetups we have will also be posting the videos to this location as well.
So there's a question about organizing your Arcade scripts, which is pretty good. I usually like to save them as JavaScript, because then if you use a JavaScript editor, they look pretty similar outside of the expression builder. I don't usually save them, except the cheat sheet for these demos, outside of where they should go. So if they should go into a geodatabase, I store them as part of the geodatabases. If they go to a pop-up, they are saved with a map and the ArcGIS Pro project. So I don't use GitHub or something like this, like Python scripts, to save them somewhere else. Can Arcade be used with relationship related tables? Yes, there's a command called feature set by relationship, where you can specify the relationship name, and that will bring you the access to the features in the other related table. And from there, you can do whatever you want with that feature set. So there is access to, it does support the relationship classes. And there's example in the GeoNet video recordings of how to get from a parcel to the record that created it, for example, by using a relationship class. Any other questions? So we would like to thank all the survivors. And thank you, Lisa and Amy and Jason, for this opportunity to show you some of the things we're working on.